Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the D and WhatIf, with another fanfiction. This is the first part of what if Deku chose to follow Kacchan's advice and wished for luck in the next life. All credits for this video go to their respective authors, so please support the real author. Check out the link in the description for more details. Please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Izuku Midoriya felt like he was finally free of all the bad things that had happened in his life. While he fell, the words Kacchan had said echoed in his head. If you think you'll have a quirk in your next life, go take a swan dive off the roof. Well, Kacchan wouldn't be able to say Izuku hadn't followed his advice. The thing about jumping off a building is all the hitting the ground part. Theoretically quick and painless, but that was not what happened in reality. The first thing Izuku felt when he stopped falling was numbness. He couldn't hear any sounds, couldn't smell any scent. For God's sake, he couldn't even taste the blood that most definitely was in his mouth. For a whole moment the boy thought he was dead. But then the pain came. A pain too big to be expressed in words. Everything in the world revolved around that horrible feeling that took over all his other senses. He knew it was the end. It would be a painful one. But at least he wouldn't have to endure any more of the bullying that he had been put through for the last 10 years. Or so he thought. His body was slowly, but definitely, feeling less sore. It could have been death, but he didn't thought that. Once he got to the afterlife, there would be someone muttering that everything would be fine. That he needed to be strong. His body was changing. And it wasn't something that felt good. He could feel his arms and legs getting harder and the pain was fading. It was weird. As soon as his eyes were working properly, he could see, in a reddish tone, a girl that had her hands placed on his chest. She was crying, "Please stay alive, please." Her voice was hoarse and her face had wet lines that started at her eyes and went all the way down to her chin. There were a few red stains on her face and shirt, probably blood. His blood. Wah! Izuku tried to speak but nothing would come out. It felt like somebody was trying to rip his voice cords out of his throat. "Oh, Christ, you're alive!" She almost screamed while moving her hands around the boy's body. "I'm making sure there is no more internal or external bleeding. I'll fix the other things as soon as I'm done with this. Please hang in there for me." Izuku wasn't able to say anything back. He just closed his eyes while trying to endure the pain that took all over his body. By the time the girl ended what she was doing, that excruciating feeling was gone, replaced by a lighter version, bearable for him after all those times he had been hit by his bullies. "Who are you?" he was able to say while the girl helped him sit, leaning against the wall. He had chosen a dark and smaller alley in a far and more dangerous neighborhood to jump because it would not disturb many people, which meant that it was definitely not the cleanest place nor the one with the best smell. It made no sense for a girl like that to be walking on this part of town. "My name is Shufuku Yui," she answered while adding some distance between her and the bloodied boy that had almost died. "You saved me," Izuku said it, almost like a question. "Of course I did. When I saw you jump why'd you do that?" She got confused with the question when she saw that his eyes were actually showing surprise. "I think I should be the one that asks that," Yui said, feeling a bit shocked when she realized what had actually happened. That boy in front of her would have died. Literally died. "I guess I just don't want to keep living a useless life," Izuku said while he buried his face between his hands, trying his best to hold the tears that threatened to fall. "No life is useless," Yui said quickly. Too quickly for Izuku's taste. She didn't know the truth about him. She didn't know that he was a useless Deku, and no one actually believed that he could pursue his dream. Not even his own mother did. "Yeah, right," Izuku sniffed and took a deep breath. "My entire life has been literal hell. I can't do one single thing right. I can't even die properly, without getting in somebody's way or something. And now I made you lose time and energy healing somebody that won't even make a difference in society." His body felt heavy. Izuku leaned against the wall trying to process all the information. "Wow, don't be so pessimistic," the girl said while getting closer, trying to make him look at her. "If it means anything, this helped me a lot." "What do you mean?" Izuku asked, finally getting the courage to look at the girl in the eyes. She had an ordinary face, probably wouldn't draw attention in a crowd. "I'm actually studying to become a doctor, since my quirk comes in handy," she said with a little excitement. "It was an opportunity for me. I am completely sure I want to help out people now." "Yeah, whatever," Izuku whispered while looking down at the blood puddle that reflected the dim light coming from a pole. "And it was a chance for me to learn something new," the girl said it while scratching her neck. "I had no idea that when somebody nearly dies it can damage that person's quirk genes." Izuku's head moved so fast that he got dizzy for a moment. Genes for what? Even though he felt like screaming, he didn't. His voice was disturbingly calm, as if he lost control of it, he would lose control of everything else. "You quirk genes, the ones that specify what quirk you have and how it works," she said casually. "You know, you probably had this class before. I know what a quirk gene is, but," he didn't know if he should tell her. She may react like the other people and actually realize how a waste of time he was, saving the life of a quirkless kid, but then, how did she feel a quirk gene in someone that hadn't had one? I was diagnosed quirkless when I was 4 years old. The words were hard to say. They tasted bitter and almost made his tongue numb. He waited for the angry reaction he had seen multiple times in doctors' faces. He waited for her to snap, to go away, to laugh, or to say that it would have been better if she hadn't rescued him. He knew it was true, but she didn't. Are you sure? The question was so ridiculous that he felt like laughing. Of course he was sure. For the past 10 years his classmates had gone out of their way, done everything to make sure Izuku knew how inferior he was. Yes, I am. The doctor even showed me this x-ray of my foot, showing me that I had the second joint in my little toe finger. Izuku started blinking fast while he tried to stop the tears from falling. He was too emotionally drained to bake over old memories, especially the bad ones. Well, he must have made some mistake then, because you definitely have a quirk gene, she said while getting up. Izuku could notice a small trembling at her bloodied hand. But Izuku wanted to talk about it. It made no sense. If what she was saying was true, then what could have happened to make his quirk so hard to show up? And that doctor, did he read the files correctly? It was so confusing. His head was spinning and aching. All he wanted was to forget everything that had happened. But if it was possible, if he actually had a quirk, then maybe, just maybe, he could know. He didn't want to get his hopes high just to have his dream crushed again. It would hurt too much. But, listen, I really should be going home now, and you too, she said with a cracking voice. Especially to change your clothes. Yui made sure she wasn't a mess. Way easier than it would be for Izuku. But you should maybe ask your school counselor for help. Quirks are genetic, so aim for one of your parents' quirks and it should be easy to figure it out. Okay. Hope you get better, kid. Then she left, as quickly as she'd appeared. And Izuku was alone to think. He really shouldn't get his hopes high, but she sounded so confident. Izuku was tired. His entire body ached because of what had happened the day before. His head was filled with intrusive thoughts all the time, and, more than that, he had been through several panic attacks ever since he got home. What the hell was happening to him? His body was like that because of the injuries he had suffered the other day, or was it because of a quirk? Life was getting tougher by the second, and the boy didn't thought he would be able to handle it for much longer. The good thing, though, the burning marks that were on his shoulder due to Kacchan's anger were gone. Not only that, but every single other scar, stain, or scab was also gone. He should have thanked that girl for what she'd done, truly should. But when she saved him, he was confused. For Christ's sake, he had really jumped off of a building. He would have actually died. And even though by now that didn't seem so pleasant anymore, when he was at that place he had actually thought it was for the best. After all, what would a useless guy like him even be good for? He had always been the stupid Deku. The only one that couldn't accomplish his dream because he was born differently, less evolved. But now, what did he even thought about the possibility of not being so useless after all? Well, he was definitely scared. His head was flooded by memories of his childhood. The days he would spend trying to attract small objects towards him or blow fire out of his mouth. He had tried for so long, and he was so sad when they told him he wouldn't develop a quirk, even though his eyes were glossy with tears. He raised his hands towards a pen over his writing desk. He was so focused that when he heard the knock on the door he panicked. He didn't want his mom to see him like that. She would pity him, surely, and it was far from what Izuku had in mind. Hey, baby, did you rest tonight? Inko Midoriya's voice was sweet and caring when she opened the door to see her son sitting at his bed, feet already on the floor with a sleepy face and messy hair. Not that it was less messy usually, but she thought those curls were adorable. Yes, Mom, I did, Izuku replied with a tired voice. He was lying. The boy hadn't had a single hour of sleep. He felt too disturbed to actually close his eyes, which resulted in a very tired Izuku in the morning. At wasn't quite sure how he would be able to watch classes when he wanted nothing more than to stay in his room trying to get rid of this sinking feeling. Inko didn't seem to believe him, but nodded understandingly. If her boy didn't feel like sharing what was in his mind, she wouldn't force him to. I should get ready for school now, but thanks, Mom. It was all Izuku needed to say to make her close his bedroom door and get back to the kitchen. He felt bad hiding it from her. But he also knew that talking about the possible quirk gene would mean talking about the girl that helped him, and it would lead to the trying to kill himself part that would lead to Kacchan. And Izuku didn't want to ruin Kacchan's chance of becoming a hero. His dream had always been becoming a hero. And after what Kacchan had said, he sort of gave up. He had no quirk, no talent, didn't know basic fighting technique, and was helplessly weak. He couldn't become a hero. Even if he actually had a quirk, it couldn't be that good since he had never realized he had one. Probably it was something like his creepy muttering that everybody made fun of. It wouldn't suit a hero. He took a slice of bread and a cup of coffee, even though he didn't like it that much. He had a long day ahead. He needed to be strong. School was almost unbearable. He had been so tired that he dozed off several times. Luckily, his teachers didn't seem to care if he paid attention or not. One of the perks of being him. On the other hand, his classmates seemed to care a lot about his sleep schedule. Oi, Deku. One of Kacchan's friends, Fingers, as the blonde referred, came to his desk as the teacher went out of the classroom, heading to his next class of the day. "I thought Bakugo told you to jump off a building, so why are you still here?" Izuku curled a little while avoiding eye contact. He couldn't exactly tell that he followed Kacchan's advice. It would only make the bullying worse. Izuku's voice was trembling. He just wanted to go away. Hopefully take a nap as soon as he got home. "Leave him be," another classmate told Fingers. "Have you heard All Might's in town? Apparently some people said they saw him capture this weird-ass villain yesterday. I'm hoping that I can see him patrolling after class." Izuku felt an energy rush. All Might was here, but he kept quiet. He didn't want to draw attention while he anxiously waited for the school day to end. Izuku most definitely did not plan going near that street again. If he was being completely honest, he actually wished that thing had never happened. But while he was walking, something pulled him towards that alley. Something he couldn't quite understand. It seemed the same, but now that blood puddle was dry and the smell worsened a little. He stared at it. Did he really lose that much blood? It was like a horror movie, and he was the victim. Izuku didn't realize that he had started hyperventilating until he felt dizzy. Even after all the experience with panic attacks, it was still hard to manage them. He felt like he was going to die. Again, all the feelings he had been keeping up for the day flooded all together. He was tired. He wanted just one day of peace. One day that he didn't feel threatened to go on the streets. Just that. Was this too much to ask? Was it so hard to be done? He was useless. He had been useless forever. He already knew it. It was so exhausting to be remembered that you are less than other people just because you looked at the ones that surrounded you. A grip in his neck made the boy come back to reality. What the hell is happening? Was the first thing that Izuku thought as he was pushed against the wall by some guy. The first thing he noticed was that the man, even though was big, didn't have that much muscle, which didn't mean a single thing since Izuku was such a weak loser. The second thing, however, was the guy's quirk. He had nails that were growing sharp. One hand was around Izuku's neck and the other was near his face. A numb feeling ran through the boy's cheeks as the villain played with the skin. "Look what we got here," the villain's breath stenched. "Don't you think you should be at home, kid?" Izuku was panicking. He was alone. There was no sign of other people nearby, and the villain had a scary quirk. He was helpless. It had been stupid to come to this place. With luck, he would be able to stay alive. The boy had lost every single drop of hope when he felt the villain's nails piercing through his neck flesh. The pain made him scream, only to be hit by the guy's free hand. He prayed that those knife-like nails wouldn't hit any major veins. But then, out of nowhere, Izuku felt an urge, as if a mysterious voice was commanding him. "Touch him." Izuku moved his hand up to the man's hand, the one gripping on his neck. His sight was starting to get black, and his despair was increasing. Izuku needed to do something. He needed to get away from Thaw Man. But he couldn't escape when those nails were that deep on his skin. If he even tried to move, they would rip his neck open. And then it would be a matter of seconds until he kissed the world goodbye. If he only had a quirk like Eraserhead's. If he could make that guy's quirk stop. When he rubbed his hand in the villain's, it was as if he was struck by lightning. Both of them, in fact. But while Izuku only felt energy rushing through his veins, the other guy's eyes started rolling upwards, showing nothing but the creepy white area. Izuku was thinking about screaming when he felt the man's nails starting to return to their normal lengths and the grip on his neck getting looser. He could feel the warm blood leaking from the wounds all the way down his neck, entering his uniform. It was terrifying. His vision had not blackened anymore, but he was scared. He was so spellbound that only after a big hand grabbed his shoulder and a familiar voice started calling him that he realized that, right in front of him, less than a meter apart, there was the greatest hero Japan had ever seen. If he didn't faint from the blood loss, Izuku was sure he would have fainted by the sight of All Might right in front of him. "Young man, you need to go to a hospital." All Might's deep and iconic voice was loud and clear, and Izuku knew he had to stop the bleeding, but it was All Might, flesh and bone. He had so many things to ask him. He had so much he needed to say. "All Might, sir, Izuku stopped talking as he looked down. The man that attacked him was unconscious, laying on the ground while All Might was knelt down to get to the boy's height. But that wasn't what shocked the boy. No, far from that. While he checked for the villain's nails without success, he tried to Ikwai's forearm, and it had hurt him. When Izuku checked his own hands, he felt like he couldn't breathe. He made sure his nails were always short to make it easier to type in computers or ever do basic things that might be harder if they were long. He definitely did not let his nails get so long and sharp. For a moment he was confused, but when realization hit him, it was the last drop. Izuku felt numb when his body collapsed and he fell right into All Might's arms. Having an almost death experience 2 days in a row is not as charming as it may sound. If the physical fatigue wasn't enough to make Izuku tired, the mental one would excel at it. His limbs were sore from accumulated tension. Not to mention his neck that hurt a lot more at the places the punctures were located. His head ached so badly that when he tried to open his eyes, everything felt too bright, too painful. Izuku, baby. The familiar voice of Inko Midoriya hit Izuku's ears, shooting some sort of panic through his body, making him sit as fast as he could, trying his best to keep his eyes open. No, 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 was the only coherent thought rushing in his mind. It was the worst scenario. All he didn't wanted was to worry his mom. But now she was there, the infamous Midoriya's tears already streaming down her cheeks. I was so worried. Crap. Izuku tried to remember everything that had happened and froze when he remembered the nails. Had that actually happened or had it been an hallucination? He turned his head at his hands and there were nothing but his regular hands, with regular-sized nails. Mom, what were you thinking? She cut him off while caressing his cheeks. Going to such a dangerous neighborhood, so far from home. Oh God. Izuku was not going to tell her the reason, he was sure of that. He didn't thought he'd ever be able to tell her what had happened. But it wasn't the easiest task to think of an excuse with such a terrible migraine like that one. Were those dots blinking on his mother's face? I was trying to find All Might. Izuku started hyperventilating while trying to organize the thoughts. Some guys at school mentioned that he was doing hero work around town and you know how I really like him and all I wanted was to meet him. But I guess it didn't went the way I planned and there was this villain that. He blurted. Yes, I do know what happened. Inko didn't sound angry anymore. It was just some worry. A very nice police officer called me while I was at work to tell me that a certain son of mine was hurt and needed me to come to the hospital as soon as I could. I'm so sorry, Mom. Izuku covered his face with his hands in embarrassment. I promise I will never do something like this again. Ever. Izuku felt like he couldn't breathe while his mom stared at him, frowning. Her watery eyes seemed as sharp as blades. Fine, then. She hugged him as tight as possible, making Izuku whine a little. The boy let his tears fall as well. Even though he hadn't realized it, he really needed a hug. Come on, now. Inko shot him a small smile while helping him get up. We are having katsudon for dinner. Toshinori Yagi felt tired all the time. He had been doing everything he could in the past few days to help the people around him. But using his power was taking its toll. Every day, as soon as he reached his time limit, all he felt was a lack of air, his heartbeat raised and it almost felt like he was dying. His worries were going up by the day. He wasn't sure how much longer he would be able to endure. Every second he wasted in his skinny form, would it be in his apartment or doing normal things like going to the market, made him anxious. He needed to find a successor as soon as possible. Whenever he woke up he had a small moment he would freak out. What if I die today? He needed to make sure One for All would be safe at some healthier person's hands. But he had no one yet. His phone rang the moment he entered the new apartment he had rented. Tsukauchi was calling him. Hey, Tsukauchi, is there something wrong? Toshinori had talked to him when he arrested this thug that was assaulting a kid earlier that day. His friend usually wouldn't call him during work, unless it was really important. I think so. But there is something that is bothering me about that guy you took in earlier. Is him someone dangerous? Is there some sort of gang? Toshinori didn't know how he would be able to help with anything like that, at least not alone. No, nothing like that. The officer's voice was serious, which made Toshinori anxious, or at least more than he already was. We were checking that guy for any criminal background. And he matched to some other minor actions. Harassment, burglary, stuff like that. And why are you telling me this? All Might didn't want it to be rude, but he felt like Tsukauchi was stalling. The guy's background also says that he has a quirk that gives him the ability to make his nails longer and sharper, which wouldn't call my attention if the prisoner himself hadn't mentioned that he can no longer use his quirk. Toshinori's head ached. He understood now why Tsukauchi was calling. Are you sure he's telling us the truth? He asked even though he knew it was stupid. The guy didn't lie. But, still, I made sure the lab would do a genetic scan of him to check if his quick cells are damaged or inoperative. I'll tell you as soon as I can what our scenario is. Thank you. Toshinori leaned against the wall. He felt the panic taking over his body, making him his own hostage. It was everything he feared the most. He was in no condition to fight all for one if that was him. He had always feared that the monster was still alive. It was always this feeling deep inside his stomach that made him feel that the fight was not over. Almost as if the previous holders of One for All could sense the darkness in this world, never letting him rest properly. All he could do was wait. Wait until his fragile body decided to calm down. 2 deep breaths and everything seemed to be spinning. 2 more and his consciousness was fading. He decided to stop counting, just letting the despair take control of him and disappear with time. He felt his phone buzz, and even though he knew that it would be best to wait until he was less stressed, he couldn't do that. Not with Tsukauchi. He raised the screen while it lit up. The message was clear. Quirk genes non-existent. Fuck. Izuku was having a breakdown. As soon as he got home, he went to his bathroom, saying that he needed to take a shower. His mother was worried about his wounds, but Izuku promised that he'd protect them carefully. When he finally closed the door, his eyes turned to look at his hands. It wasn't like he hadn't looked at them the whole ride back home. But it surely was something different when he had no one near him. He wasn't sure about what he had seen before he fainted. It could totally be something his mind made up, but he felt something. As if his body knew it was different. Izuku took a deep breath as he focused on his hands. What was he supposed to do? Was this quirk thought activated? He didn't think so. If it was, then something would have probably happened while he was coming home, since it was the only thing he could think about. He wasn't even sure what his own quirk was. Maybe he could copy other people's quirks. It didn't mean anything, right? That guy could have deactivated his own quirk when he fainted. And what Izuku had done was just. He shook his head while he tried to calm his breath down. He put his hands on the bathroom counter and looked at himself in the mirror. He was just ordinary. His body was slim and he had an ordinary face. The thing that would draw the most attention was his green hair. But even colors that weren't considered natural a few decades ago were starting to be more common. His neck had a white gauze around it, protecting his stitches. He knew he shouldn't do it, but he didn't care anymore. Izuku unwrapped the white fabric from around his neck. It wasn't pretty. The cuts were clean, but it was red and swollen. The black knots made Izuku sick. It was disgusting. It looked like something he would see at a horror movie, not on himself. Why had it happened? Why had he jumped? If he hadn't, then none of this would have happened. He would keep living as the useless piece of trash he was, tossed aside. But at least he wouldn't be feeling like this. The tears fell while Izuku swallowed his groans. He was so tired of this. The sadness and fear became angrier. Izuku didn't know how to react. He had never been so angry. He had never felt like this before. He started pushing his arms harder against the counter. His fingertips started to turn white. And before he realized, there they were, long and sharp nails that started to pierce through the granite slab. Izuku took some steps back, startled by them. But when he checked again, the nails had disappeared. What? Did it mean it was rage activated? Or was it something else? He was forcing his fingers at the counter, so it could be it. Frowning, Izuku curled his fingers, making sure to keep them spaced. He forced them as hard as he could without making it dangerous to cut himself, and he could see the nails stretching and getting pointy. He felt a mix of feelings. He had used a quirk. It wasn't his. And he wasn't sure if it was a good thing, but he used a quirk. An actual quirk, like he always dreamt of. Of course, it wasn't the most powerful or flashy one, but still, it was more than he had experienced his entire life. He relaxed the fingers and watched the nails return to their normal length. A small smile found a way to his face, but was soon undone with an unsettling thought. Was that man able to use his quirk? Izuku's answer came quicker than he had expected. He was having dinner with his mother. The katsudon looked delicious, but the idea of stealing somebody else's quirk was so terrifying that it made it taste like dirt. Growing up the way he had, Izuku knew that life without a quirk was horrible. Society's bias towards quirkless people was enough to make a lot give up. There was a reason why a large percentage of quirkless people committed suicide before the age of 30. It was the kind of punishment Izuku wouldn't wish anyone. But the man was a villain, right? He had hurt people. He would have killed Izuku. Maybe it wasn't so bad, after all, right? A knock at the door made Izuku stop looking at his plate and look at his mother. Izuku was getting up to answer it, but his mom insisted that she could do it and wanted him to finish eating. The man that walked in the apartment was wearing an overcoat. He had black hair and a tired expression when he introduced himself. Hello, Mrs. Midoriya. I am Detective Tsukauchi, the one responsible for arresting the man that attacked your son. I was wondering if I could ask him some questions. Oh, sure. Inko answered sweetly while she led the men towards the kitchen where Izuku had already finished eating his dinner. Izuku felt uncomfortable. Something in the man's eyes was weird. Good afternoon, Midoriya-kun. I'm glad to see that you are already able to come home. The injuries weren't that bad, Izuku replied, turning his eyes away from the officers and shrinked a little. I was lucky. Yes, indeed you were, Tsukauchi said while sitting at the chair opposite to Izuku's. I was wondering if you could answer some things to fill up the gaps we have about the attack. Sure, the answer was dry. Drier than Izuku would have liked to speak, especially with an authority. He still didn't look at the man. His mother came and sat on the chair by his side, putting her hand on Izuku's shoulder. Were you alone when you got in that alley? The detective asked. Yes. Did you see the man coming at you? No, I got distracted and didn't realize that there was someone coming. He attacked me from the back, so I couldn't see him. Tsukauchi narrowed his eyes. The kid hadn't lied, which was a good thing, but he didn't need his quirk to confirm the answers since the thug had already answered them all. The only question he needed the kid's answer was one. Even though he had read the kid's medical files, he had to be sure. For Toshinori, I would like to know what your quirk is. The boy seemed to shrug a little while kept his eyes at the ground. Mrs. Midoriya's hands rubbed her son's arms and back while looking at the detective with a sad, pitiful frown. Izuku was diagnosed quirkless. I was hoping that your son could answer this question. I can't see the relevance of that, Inko replied with a deadly look on her face. Tsukauchi understood that it must be something hard for the kid, but he needed the confirmation. Mrs. Midoriya's words were truthful, but he knew for a fact that mothers didn't know all about her sons. It was brought to our attention that the thug that attacked your son is now unable to use his quirk. We are asking it because if your son isn't the one responsible for that, we will need to start a second investigation for what caused this and if it may be dangerous. Well, the medical report wasn't enough. I'm pretty sure you can access it, Inko said angrily. Izuku hadn't the courage to look up at the detective. If he wanted Izuku to answer that, he probably had a reason. Maybe it was his quirk, something to detect if the person was lying or not. As much as Izuku would love to ramble about the possibilities that someone with that quirk would have working to the police, he knew he had to think of a way to escape this, even if that man's quirk had nothing to do with it. The mere possibility already meant that Izuku couldn't lie. He looked up to his mom, thinking of something to tell the officer that wouldn't be a lie. It's okay, Mom. I can answer that. Izuku shooed her a small and fake smile. Then he looked at the detective's eyes while answering. Ever since I was diagnosed quirkless, I've woken up like that every single day. Tsukauchi looked at the boy. There were no lies in his words, which was everything but a relief. That meant that Toshinori's fears were right. All for One was out there and, somehow, was able to steal that men's quirk right under the police's nose. Thank you, Mrs. Midoriya-kun. I am sorry for my rudeness. Inko still felt angry with the detective for putting her son through that while she led him out of the apartment. She felt her heart drop when her son said that he wanted to sleep, going to his room without even saying goodnight. Her poor baby. The word about Izuku's encounter with the villain spread as flames in dry grass. Every single person in Aldera started whispering when he passed through them at the halls. You could have thought that people would be kinder towards him. He could have died, but it apparently had the opposite effect. Every now and then somebody would make fun of him. Finally decided to follow Bakugo's advice, Deku? Or maybe if you weren't so useless you could have protected yourself. If the situation had been different, Izuku would have probably agreed and would have kept a low profile throughout the day. But it hadn't. He weren't useless, for God's sake. He had actually used his quirk before All Might had saved him. If he hadn't been so shocked about everything, he was pretty sure that he could have made it, save himself, that is. And as much as the small and almost unnoticeable prideful part of him wanted him to show what he was capable of, the logical part of his brain knew he couldn't say a word about what had actually happened. After Detective Tsukauchi had left the night before, Izuku rushed to his room and had a whole panic attack while he thought about that quirk of his. He couldn't believe what he had done. Everything felt wrong. His existence seemed wrong. How had he even ended up with such a horrible quirk? Genetically it was possible. A mutation was rare, but within reasons. But he wasn't better than any of those villains out there. He couldn't simply steal other people's quirks like it was nothing. It didn't seem legal, after all. Deku, Kacchan's voice was hoarse and threatening. Do you think you could have beaten that thug all by yourself? Izuku opened his mouth to answer, even if what he was saying was a lie. But the words never left his mouth as fingers started speaking beforehand. Of course he couldn't, Bakugo. All you have to do is look at him. The whole classroom started laughing while they turned to have a better view of the situation. The teacher was looking at a paper, clearly pretending to be distracted. It wasn't any news. The teachers had always neglected Izuku. With such a weak body like yours, and no quirk, I bet that the villain would have killed you in a sec. The guy that could stretch his eyeballs out of their sockets said while he poked Kacchan's arms. The only reason why Deku didn't die is because he is that much useless, not even able to get himself killed. The wave of laughter that came after that made Izuku's body shiver. They were all right. Before he had found out about his quirk, he had thought the same thing about everything they were saying. I think that even if Deku had a quirk he wouldn't be able to use it for his life, Kacchan said while looking deep inside Izuku's eyes. That's probably why his dad never came home. It must be hard to look such a worthless person like him and remember that it's your legacy. That was awful. Izuku felt the piece of hatred and anger that had recently made itself noticeable swell. Every time Kacchan had insulted him, he was talking about things that Izuku knew about himself. He always said how Izuku was not able to become a hero, or how much of a waste he was. He had never said a word about Izuku's family before, especially something so cruel. Izuku wanted to scream with Kacchan. The laughter that got louder when Izuku shrunk even more was maddening. All those people. Did Kacchan really meant what he had said? No, it didn't matter. He had said it nonetheless, and it was more than enough to make him a bad person. For his whole life Izuku had thought Katsuki would become a great hero. He had the guts, he had the quirk, he even had the grades. The bullying was bearable, and Izuku just imagined that it was how society worked. But, had he been fooled his entire life? Would Katsuki become a great hero, a savior, or would he end up as a tyrant? Someone that used his status and power to oppress minorities such as him? If Izuku had Katsuki's power, he was sure he was going to be less of an asshole. If he took Katsuki's powers, would he be? What in the actual hell was he thinking about? Izuku grabbed his bag as fast as he could and rushed out of the classroom. His breathing was heavy as he tried to calm himself down. He hadn't meant to think that. He hadn't. He knew how horrible his quirk was. He couldn't be possibly meaning what he thought, right? Even if Katsuki's power made him a bad person, right? Izuku wasn't sure where to go. He just kept running through the streets, trying not to think about that terrible idea. He was such a bad person. He got mad. He shouldn't have thought of it. If he had given the slightest hint about what had gone through his head at the moment, he was sure Katsuki would blow him up to pieces. But wasn't that a bad thing? Izuku wanted to scream. He had no idea what was wrong or right. He had no idea what to think about all of that. He was tired, stressed, and overall angry. He just wanted somebody he could trust, somebody that he could vent to. But who, in their right insane mind, would help someone with such a villainous quirk? No one. The moment he opened his mouth to say who he actually was, he was sure whoever it was, that the person would go straight to the police, and then he would go to jail and would never be able to become a hero. Izuku stopped as soon as the last thought ran through his head. He happened to be at Takoba Beach's side when realization hit him. He couldn't become a hero. Ever. It was all his quirk's fault. No one would want a hero like him. No one would accept a hero that stole quirks. All his dreams came apart that day. Everything that he had ever wanted. Gone. The boy dragged himself into the beach. The piles of garbage would be enough for him to hide from whomever passed by the street. He needed to be alone. He sat next to an old rusty fridge that was heavy enough to withstand his weight and then rested his back on the metal surface. He made the nail at his right hand index finger grow, feeling a mix of disgust, hatred, and anger. He scratched the fridge's surface, making a steady line. He kept making lines. Some were just a burst of anger while others were more logical. He looked at his work. It was only a word, but it meant a lot more to him. It was cruel, but it was the truth. He couldn't take his eyes from the messily written Deku at the surface. It was the truth after all. Long minutes passed before Izuku finally burst in complete despair. Making all his nails longer, the boy scratched the word until it was no longer recognizable. He cried. Again. He knew he cried a lot. Just another way to show how weak he was. Just another proof that he was useless. He looked to the side, seeing a crab walking in his direction. It had an orange shell, and moved steadily, as if he didn't care about Izuku's presence. The boy took the crustacean at his hand. Its paws were pointy and funny looking. He just wished to be free as that crab. Don't worry about any of these things. God, it was so simple. If he could only get rid of this stupid quirk. His hands started tingling. A sudden pain made Izuku drop the poor animal back in the sand. He looked at his hands, confused about why he had those holes in his hands. But then he looked at the crab again. Something about its paws seemed weird. Izuku examined it, being careful when he grabbed the crustacean again. Its nails seemed weird, pointier, sharper. Izuku suddenly tried using the thug's quirk again. Nothing. He couldn't even feel that weird sensation anymore. Was this part of his quirk? Could he give those quirks to other people? Without letting the crab go, Izuku did what he had done when he was attacked, wished a quirk. To be more specific, the quirk at that crab's body. The familiar sensation of energy bursting through his veins. And as the feeling stopped, he tried using the nail quirk again. There they were, as if they'd never left. He could give them back. His quirk was able to steal and give quirks to other people. It didn't mean it was totally bad, then. He could still be a hero, couldn't he? Izuku got up as fast as lightning. He was definitely going to analyze it later, but he needed to do something first. Izuku started walking to the police station Detective Tsukauchi said he worked at. When Naomasa Tsukauchi woke up that day, he felt terrible. Not only he had made a kid that had been through a near-death experience uncomfortable, but he'd had to tell Toshinori about All for One being on the loose. He couldn't say it by the phone, obviously, so he had gone to his friend's apartment. The sight of the symbol of peace panicking was most definitely not reassuring. He had barely slept the night before. The only thing he could visualize whenever he closed his eyes was blood, destruction, and his friend's dead body. He knew Toshinori couldn't fight against All for One. Not in his condition, at least. So, when an officer came by telling that a young boy named Midoriya wanted to see him, he was confused. Had the kid lied? His quirk hadn't identified any lies. Perhaps he had witnessed somebody else, and that's why he was so scared when he asked about the guy's quirk. The migraine he had wasn't helping at all. While Tsukauchi waited calmly for the kid to enter his office, Izuku was freaking out. It had seemed like a good idea in the heat of the moment. Truly. But when he stepped down at the precinct, this weird stomachache started bugging him. What if he got arrested? He was terrified that Detective Tsukauchi would be mad at him for lying. Well, it wasn't exactly lying. It was more hiding the truth. Excuse me, Detective Tsukauchi, sir. I wanted to speak with you if it won't be a problem. Izuku was sure that the man could hear his heartbeat even with that distance between them. The boy made sure to hide his sweaty hands in his pants pockets. Sure, Midoriya-kun, is there something you wanted to talk about yesterday? Izuku shrinked a bit while looking at his shoes. He felt dizzy, as if he was about to faint. Oh, God, everything would go wrong. He would never be able to live a happy life or anything like that because he was going to rot in jail for the rest of his life. If only he had been stronger. If he could have handled all of this by himself. The tears rushed to his eyes while he started blinking as fast as he could to stop them from falling. Kid, is everything okay? The detective's voice was sweet. Izuku shook his head in a negative gesture. He wanted to say it, but his tongue felt numb and dry. His voice was more a cry than anything else, but he forced himself to speak. I did that. Tsukauchi froze. He could feel the truth in his words. But, could it be? Did what? His voice was cautious, afraid that any slightly harsher tone could make the boy feel in danger. I stole that man's quirk, the kid sobbed. I hadn't meant to, I swear. I didn't even knew I had a quirk until yesterday. Izuku blurted out as if he couldn't keep it to himself. It was an accident, and I didn't know what to. Hey, calm down, Naomasa said while grabbing a glass of water for the clearly unsettled boy. I need you to relax, okay? Izuku grabbed the glass gladly and drank everything in a single sip. His hands were shaking as he put the glass at the table's surface. Now, you are going to tell me exactly what happened. The detective's eyes were serious, but not in a scary way. It was almost as if what Izuku had done was not terrible and dangerous. Not a single detail off. Okay, the boy agreed and breathed deeply. Just to make it clear, my quirk works as a lie detector, so no lying. What were you doing in that alley? Izuku opened his mouth but no words came. He couldn't lie. He didn't want his mom to figure it out either. What I say here? Will you tell my mom? He could see Detective Tsukauchi getting suspicious, but he needed to be sure. As long as you don't do illegal things, I can keep this conversation between ourselves. Had he done anything illegal? It didn't seem that suicide would be illegal, but he really were not that aware of the laws. However, bullying and suicide baiting were. He could be mad with Kacchan, but be the one that puts a criminal record on his back. Izuku didn't want it to be the one to do it. I went there because the day before. He didn't have to say why, did he? It really wasn't connected to the attack, so it wouldn't be lying nor hiding informations. I had tried to kill myself. Wow, the mood at the room had changed drastically. It really wasn't what Izuku wanted to happen, but he felt so much better. It was no longer his secret. He felt so much lighter. He felt like crying, but it would probably give up the wrong impression. You did what? Tsukauchi said while he made a huge effort to stay set. Was that kid insane? But I'm fine. This girl saved me. Izuku rushed to explain and make the detective less worried. She had some sort of healing quick. And then she said that my quirk genes had been damaged. She thought it was because of my near-death experience. But then, the day after that, I used my quirk, so now that I think about it, it was probably the reason why I thought I didn't have a quirk. It was probably. The kid started mumbling about several things that Tsukauchi couldn't understand. What the hell was that kid thinking? Midoriya, why would you do something like that? Izuku noticed how horrified Tsukauchi's voice was. Had he done a bad thing by telling that to the detective? Would he be so shocked that he would tell his? Please, don't tell this to my mom. Midoriya, you said you wouldn't. Izuku's voice sounded one octave higher than usual, and he seemed desperate. Tell me what happened during the attack, Tsukauchi said, feeling a weird feeling on his chest. Izuku was obviously mad for the detective changing the subject, but answered anyway. The villain pushed me to the wall, attacked me, all like I said before. My quirk activated a few seconds before All Might came to rescue me. It was like this electric wave running through my body. I see, Tsukauchi said while writing something down at his notepad. But the reason I came here is not just to tell you about this, sir. Izuku was hoping that he could convince Tsukauchi to keep his mouth shut about what happened if he showed that he was not a bad person. Please elaborate. Tsukauchi felt a little less worried now. That meant there was no all for one. That meant Toshinori still had time. I can give the guy his quirk back. I've only discovered it a few minutes ago, but I can. I don't have a villainous quirk. Oh no. Tsukauchi had no idea what to do. This boy's quirk. How? He needed to tell Toshinori about this. They had to do some research about this boy's dad as fast as possible. It couldn't be a coincidence. And as much as it seemed terrifying, it was a clue. And a clue meant they had a chance, even if small, to fight back. To destroy the symbol of evil at last. To give his friend some peace of mind. Come here with me, kid. I'll take you to the villain so you can give him his quirk back. Tsukauchi was not sure about many things. He couldn't say if it was going to rain the next day. And he probably couldn't say what the laws of thermodynamics were either. But there was one thing he was sure of. He couldn't let this kid turn evil. He knew the kid had avoided answering when he asked why he had done that. He knew he was probably going through a lot if he had tried to commit suicide. But he didn't want his mom to figure it out, which meant that he most likely was victim of bullying. If what he said about thinking he was quirkless was true, and Naomasa knew it was, it would not be shocking to believe the bullying was bad. That was how society worked. After all, he led the boy through the halls until they reached the thug's cell. He needed to help this kid. Fast. Izuku didn't need a babysitter. At least that was what he thought. But, apparently, Detective Tsukauchi didn't thought like Izuku. In fact, every time the boy looked at his apartment windows, there would be a police car waiting for him. He didn't understood why the detective would make such a fuss about what had happened. It felt almost as if the detective was afraid of something. Could it be his quirk? He wasn't sure about the quirk's limitations yet, but it wasn't dangerous. In fact, Detective Tsukauchi himself had helped Izuku. He had gone to the precinct on a Friday afternoon. After he returned the thug's quirk, the detective took him home and both of them explained what happened to his mother, leaving the whole "look, Mom, I tried to kill myself" part out. Inko was shocked and confused, both because Izuku's quirk had nothing to do with hers or Hisashi's, and the fact that it appeared only now. After that, Tsukauchi and Inko helped Izuku learn more about his power. He had stolen the detective's and his mother's quirk, keeping them inside his body, and he was able to use both. It was so cool. Izuku had also realized that if he wanted to steal the quirks without making the owner faint, he needed to be careful. He had so much on his head. He wasn't sure why Detective Tsukauchi was helping him, though. Not that he wasn't glad, far from that actually, but it didn't seem something any person would be willing to do. It was a Monday morning now. All Izuku could think about was theories and more theories of what he could and couldn't do. How many quirks could he steal and keep stored inside him? Did it have a limit of how many times per day he could do it? Could he steal a mutation quirk? If he did, would his appearance change as well? Or could he control if he wanted it to be functional or not? It was amazing. So many possibilities inside of him. The police car stopped in front of Alder and Izuku ran inside the building. He was anxious, true, but now that he had a quirk, would the bullying stop? He was no longer a useless Deku. He was normal like anyone else. In fact, if he could judge his quirk, it was really powerful. He stopped. Nobody paid attention while he frowned. Would Kacchan be mad? He remembered Kacchan saying that Izuku's quirk wouldn't be nearly as powerful as his. What if Kacchan thought that Izuku's quirk was stronger? What if Izuku made him sad? There it was. Izuku could keep it to himself, right? It didn't seem to be that hard, anyways. Izuku started walking again. He didn't pay that much attention to the ground as he was lost in his thoughts. Big mistake. He stumbled against a classmate's foot, going straight to the ground, too confused to realize what had happened until the laughs echoed throughout the room. The teacher barely looked at him. He was able to sit right before the bell started ringing. It was not as easy as he thought it would be, Izuku realized when the school day was ending. Throughout the entire day, every comment about how useless and weak and not fit to society made him want to scream. He wanted so bad that it just stopped. He never really thought about it before, but had the bullying ever been that bad? He grabbed his stuff and went out of the room as fast as he could. But it hadn't been enough. As soon as he had left the building, when he stepped at the school's front yard, Kacchan grabbed him by the collar and thrusted him against the wall. Izuku gasped as memories of the recent attack came rushing through his head. Was he going to die? What the fuck is wrong with you today, huh, Deku? Kacchan was much taller than Izuku, which was quite terrifying, especially when he looked at him like that. Kacchan. Izuku looked around. Everybody just looked at him, not even trying to help. It was so screwed up. Have you forgotten about your place? A quirkless, useless person like you shouldn't even be here. Katsuki was mean. That was a fact, and just the thought of going against him made Izuku anxious. But Katsuki was wrong. But could he do it? Izuku tried holding a grin. It was a petty idea. It would only make Izuku feel better about himself and, overall, his actions would be as bad as Kacchan's. But he couldn't hold himself back. He took his hand to Kacchan's, just enough to be able to activate his quirk. Slowly he started feeling the pulse of energy filling his veins. He wasn't sure how he was able to keep a slow and steady flow, but he did. It took about 5 seconds, which wasn't a lot, but if he compared to the first time he used it, seemed like eternity. When he was sure Katsuki's power was inside of him, he tried activating it. When you spend years studying a quirk, it really is not hard at all to make it work. He felt his palms getting sweaty. He didn't want it to make a big explosion, so he made a small amount of sweat burst as fast as possible. Katsuki's face was priceless, and it only got better as he tried using his quirk only to find out that he couldn't. Izuku wanted to laugh as loudly as he could. He knew it was mean, of course he knew. But vendetta just tasted so good. What the hell did you do, you fucking extra? Katsuki was already going to punch Izuku in the face, but Midoriya had an advantage being shorter and dodged Katsuki's punch. Then he started running. Katsuki could have his quirk back by tomorrow, but Izuku just wanted him to feel a taste of what all those years had been to him. Kacchan's ego was so big that Izuku was sure he wouldn't tell a soul that he had lost to someone as useless as him. What could he do? That was just how society worked, right? It was amazing how light Izuku felt when he got inside the police car. He finally had the courage to laugh. It was amazing. His stomach hurt. There were tears leaving his eyes. They were different. They felt different. They weren't scared and weak tears. Far from that. They felt great. As his laughing stopped, something different started growing inside his guts. It was weird, like guilt. He wasn't sorry for what he had done to Kacchan specifically, but it wasn't much of a hero-like action either. He would give Kacchan's quirk back, of course. He couldn't keep it. But it wasn't right. Using your quirk without a license was illegal in the end, and Izuku didn't want it to be bad. The car stopped at the police station, which made Izuku frown. Wasn't he supposed to go home? As he got out of the car, he felt anxious. Had they heard about what he'd done? But not even 30 minutes had passed, so it wasn't logical. But the possibility made Izuku shrink, trying to make himself unnoticeable. "Oh, you're finally here," Detective Tsukauchi said while getting closer. "I'm sorry I didn't warn you about this. It was a last-minute call, but I have someone here that is a co-worker and a very dear friend to me that would like to meet you." Me. Izuku was confused. Why would anyone want to see him? He was interested in your quirk and said he wanted to meet you. Izuku was led to the familiar office that belonged to Tsukauchi only to freeze by the door. The man sitting at the chair looked terribly skinny. His cheekbones were so evident that it almost looked like he didn't have any muscle. His eyes, on the other hand, had this glow of life, contrasting with everything else. "Midoriya, this is my friend Shimura," the skeleton-like man said, almost as if he was cutting Tsukauchi's speech. Toshinori Shimura. Even though he knew the boy probably had no idea what his power meant, Toshinori Yagi was still baffled about how innocent the kid looked. Of course, he already knew the kid, but it was something completely different seeing him like this, without blood all over his body. The only hint of the attack was the gauze that circled the boy's neck. Honestly, how could someone that looked so pure carry that quirk? It scared him so much. With a face like that, it would be easy to manipulate. What the hell was he thinking? He had promised Naomasa that he would come to this meeting with an open mind. He really wanted to see this kid as some good thing, as Tsukauchi would say, but he just couldn't. The slightest possibility that this boy was related to All for One represented a threat. "Hello, sir," the boy said, voice shaking a little. "Pleased to meet you." "Now, Midoriya, Mr. Shimura will be here to study your quirk," Naomasa said while leading the kid to an armchair. "Are you a quirk analyst?" He could see the excitement flashing through the kid's eyes. "Something like that." "Yes." Toshinori didn't understood why the kid was so excited. "I think it must be an amazing job. You can work with so many heroes. Which heroes have you worked with? Are they as cool as they look at the TV? Izuku suddenly stopped talking and looked down. "I am sorry, you don't need to answer that." "Yes, I've worked with lots of heroes." Boy, something at the way this kid acted felt weird. Why had he suddenly shut himself up like that? "So, kid, I already explained what we know about your quirk to our guest. Have you figured out something new?" Naomasa's eyes were caring while the boy took a notebook from his bright yellow backpack. "Well, I was writing down what I already know and some theories." Izuku stopped again, staring to the simple object like it was a bomb. He shrugged and gave it to Toshinori. There were pages and pages about not only his quirk, but several others too. Some Yagi could connect with famous heroes. There was one that belonged to Kamui Woods, and another one to the newly debuted hero Mount Lady. This kid was definitely a nerd when talking about quirks. Do you plan on becoming an analyst?" Toshinori asked while he finally found the page about the boy's quirk. I'd never considered that," the boy said. "Really? You do have talent for that?" The kid laughed nervously. He really didn't thought that much about his notes. Kacchan had always said that it was creepy or weird. It had always been a hobby, and Izuku never thought that someone would appreciate it. "You are in the last middle school year, right?" Naomasa asked. "Perhaps the UA management department could be useful." Toshinori knew why Naomasa was asking that question. Tsukauchi had said that it would be good if Midoriya went to UA. Not only would he be near heroes, but Nezu would be able to keep an eye on the kid. And as much as he disliked the idea, he needed to admit that being near heroes could prevent the kid from turning bad. They could help him. "I don't think I would enjoy it that much. They have more to do with the financial and the propaganda. I really just like analyzing quirks. It's like a hobby, nothing else." "Do you have any idea of what you'd like to do?" The kid twitched uncomfortably. Why was he so nervous? It wasn't like Yagi or Naomasa were doing anything bad, right? I do have something in mind, but, I should probably try something else. It's kinda silly." "Come on, tell us. Maybe we can help," Tsukauchi pressed. Izuku didn't know what to do. He was sure that the moment he said he wanted to become a hero, Naomasa would judge him. He grew up thinking he was quirkless, after all, and his quirk was not that useful in battle. Of course, he could pick someone else's quirk, but what if there weren't anybody? What if the quirks weren't good enough for fighting? He would just end up being the useless and helpless Deku everybody made sure he was. And if that happened, he would be only dead weight. But Detective Tsukauchi was helping him. He didn't had to, but he was. Izuku felt like it would be rude to keep things like that. He owed him so much. Ever since I was a kid, I've always wanted to be a hero. He saw the look on Tsukauchi's face change and his heart skipped a beat. He knew it. It was ridiculous. It was only fair that the detective judged him. Izuku took a deep breath before he had the courage to speak again. So, I was thinking about what if I stole a stockpiling quirk. Would I? Izuku left about an hour after he got there. Tsukauchi was amazed by how many new questions the boy had planned. He was a little bit anxious when he left, forgetting his notebook by Tsukauchi's table. Toshinori looked more tired than usual. Toshi, no, the man replied before Naomasa could finish. I know what you're about to say, but we can't let this kid enter the hero course. Naomasa stared at his friend. Are you serious? All Might didn't even look at his face. We can't afford the kid being near the all-for-one investigation. And if he becomes a hero, his quirk is exposed. Even if he becomes an underground hero, the thugs he faces would probably sell this information. And if All for One is still alive, he will find out. But being a hero will make him able to fight back All for One. Not if the kid sympathizes for him. Toshinori had a skeptical expression. That's why he should be at the hero course, so he understands how bad villains are. They learn about laws, about ethics. If he's well teached, then there would be no problem. Besides, if we just tell him to give up on his dreams, the bitterness inside him could be a catalyzer for him sympathizing with villains. And then, if All for One is dead, we could have another one. But if he's alive, can you imagine how much chaos it would bring if those two united? Yes, I can. That's why I'm telling you that it would be best if the kid doesn't get involved with it. Yagi got up and started gesturing. You don't know how convincing that man can be. He is dangerous. He is manipulative. We shouldn't shatter the kid's dreams, but we should make him consider new options. Naomasa was quietly trying to calm himself down. The possibilities were many. Him and Toshinori wouldn't be able to find a logical solution because they were too emotionally connected with this story. While Naomasa felt sympathy and wanted to help this kid as much as possible, Toshinori was haunted by the villain that had a similar, if not identical, quirk with that of the boy. You should talk to Nedzu, Naomasa said, giving up on the argument. What? Why? He could feel the anger behind Yaga's voice. His high specs will be able to decide it. He already knows about the worst part. All for One. The kid wouldn't be a problem. I really don't think that is necessary. Naomasa locked his eyes at the skeleton-like man's. He really was in no position to judge. After all, yes, he was an officer, but he wasn't the one responsible for All for One's case. It was too dangerous to be left with the police. But still, he wanted to help. Please, I'm not asking this as Detective Tsukauchi. I'm asking this as Naomasa, your friend. He saw the effect it caused at Toshinori, making him shrink a bit. Talk to Nedzu. Ask for his advice. If he says it's best to leave the kid out of this, fine, I'll help you. But if he thinks it would be advantageous, then we shouldn't make the kid suffer more than he already has. Naomasa didn't need to say more. Toshinori sighed before replying. Fine. Katsuki had a murderous look on his face when he grabbed Deku by the collar when they met in school. There was no one near them. The class had already started, but Katsuki couldn't care less. He wanted to know what the fuck had that bastard done to him. The moment he saw Deku using a quirk, more specifically his quirk, Katsuki didn't understood what had happened. Had the nerd copied his quirk? How? But then he had tried using it. And there was nothing. Not a single drop of sweat. He had gone home as fast as possible. The old hag was able to piss him off as soon as he got there, so Katsuki just stayed at his room, thinking about what he'd do with Deku when he saw him the next day. When he got to school, he could hear the whispers when he entered his classroom. He hated them. It was like everybody was looking down on him. Not that anyone knew he hadn't been able to use his quirk since the day before, but still, Deku using his quirk had drawn attention. And then he saw him. He was using the same stupid shoes and backpack along with a new thing, a smile grin. A stupid and infuriating grin. Katsuki did his best not to punch him in the face right there. Instead, he grabbed the nerd by his collar and dragged him to the hidden area at the yard so no one could interrupt or see them. Izuku was terrified when Kacchan started dragging him somewhere else. He was used to being publicly humiliated, which, as bad as it may sound, actually made him feel safer. Being surrounded by people meant that Kacchan wouldn't be too aggressive, physically speaking. But if they were alone, what stopped him from hurting Izuku? Izuku didn't want it to fight. It would be illegal, and he really didn't want it to disappoint Detective Tsukauchi after everything he'd done. Spit it out, Deku. Katsuki's words were filled with pure hatred. How'd you did it? Kacchan, Izuku was trying to loosen the boy's grip at his uniform. Don't lie to me, you hear? I am not feeling patient today. Izuku mumbled a few incoherent thoughts and tried to steady his voice, which didn't work exactly how he planned since his voice was higher than it would normally be. It was my quirk, he said, feeling Katsuki's grip loosen. What the actual fuck? Katsuki was pissed. He really was. Had the nerd lied to him all this time? Was he fooled by a stupid extra like him? I swear, I've only known about it since Thursday, Izuku said, trying his best to calm Katsuki down. He had already been through so many traumatic situations last week, he didn't need another one. What does it do? Katsuki was scared. He didn't want to admit it, so he tried to transform this fear into anger. But he hadn't been able to make himself not worry. What if he wasn't able to retrieve his quirk back? Could Katsuki hid his trembles by getting closer to Deku and making sure he saw how pissed he was. It's a two-way quirk. I can steal quirks to myself, but I can also give it to other people, Izuku said, shrinking, and then added as soon as he could. I'm going to give yours back, I swear. I'd never planned on keeping it, so fucking do it already. Katsuki watched as Midoriya touched his hands, just like he had done the day before. A few seconds later, Katsuki felt the sweat glands at his hands tingling, and then small explosions blasted with small pops. Tell this to anyone and you're dead, you hear me? Dead. Katsuki waited for Deku to shake his head vigorously, and then let him go. He waited until he got away from Izuku to finally release the breath he was holding. He entered the male bathroom and went straight to the sink. He made sure he was alone before he finally snapped, letting his eyes fill with water as he washed his face furiously. What the hell was that feeling? Izuku didn't know what to say when he got a text from Detective Tsukauchi asking him to meet him downstairs. It was late in the afternoon. The streets were painted in shades of orange and some small stores were already closing. Tsukauchi was waiting for him in front of a black car. He had a small smile on his face, which made Izuku frown. Is everything okay, Mr. Tsukauchi, sir? Yes, Midoriya, it is. I just wanted to take you someplace. There's somebody that wants to meet you. Izuku felt weird. There are so many people wanting to meet him. What did he have that was so important? Yes, his quirk was kind of cool, but it wouldn't draw that much attention. And besides that, he was just an average boy. Something seemed off, as if Detective Tsukauchi was hiding something. But he'd helped him so much. He wouldn't do something like that, would he? Who is this person? You see, in no time. It will only take a few minutes. It wasn't only a few minutes. The traffic was heavy from the rush hour and the location they were headed was quite far. But when he got there, Izuku couldn't believe his eyes. Was that really what he thought it was? He had been around this place a lot. Always during the day, obviously. If it was already imponent at daytime, at night it was stunningly intimidating. The H-shaped building from UA was illuminated by light poles. The grassy areas were also illuminated by some smaller poles, making everything weirdly beautiful. What Izuku was doing there, he had no idea, but he wasn't complaining. It was an honor to be able to walk inside UA, especially since he wasn't a student. Why? What are we doing here? He couldn't mask the excitement in his voice. Maybe he could meet some of the teachers. They had such cool quirks. You're going to meet the principal. Izuku froze. He didn't have that many good experiences with principals. They had always blamed him for things other people had done, and overall didn't try helping him when he needed. Eventually, he just gave up talking to them, so the only times they talked was when Izuku was in trouble. Did he actually ask to meet me? Izuku asked nervously. Yes, he did. Is it because of my quirk? Naomasa stopped walking and turned to face the kid. He didn't want it to lie to him. The kid had been through a lot. He had seen it. If the ape did suicide wasn't in Pug, the flinch, the incapability to look people in the eye, and the constant anxiety the kid showed did the job. Yes, it is. Lots of thoughts started running through Izuku's head. That was it. He knew the detective must have thought he was stupid or naive to want to be a hero. He was taking him there to talk to the principal because then he would say the many reasons why somebody like him wouldn't be able to become one. Izuku felt tears come to his eyes. He already knew it right. It wasn't new. Everybody said that. Why should he think a quirk would make him able to do the job? His quirk had no way of helping him or other heroes in fights. The closer they got to the principal's office, the heavier Izuku felt. He needed to hear the words from an actual hero. He knew that it was going to hurt. He would make amends to it. Eventually, the knocks on the door were like a death sentence. Izuku couldn't even fake a smile as his breathing got heavier. Even when a mix of a dog, a mouse, and were those bare ears. Open the door. The thing could be cute if it wasn't for a nasty scar that started at his forehead, crossed his left eye, and went all the way down his face. Oh, you must be Midoriya, he said softly while gesturing to tell them they should come inside. I've heard a lot about you. Izuku felt goosebumps all around his body. Something in that animal's eyes was wrong, terrifying. Actually, yes, sir, that's me. Shall we begin? Izuku sat at an armchair and breathed deeply, waiting for the fatal words. But, instead, the creature smiled profusely while pouring tea at some cups. I'm Principal Nezu. Tea. I was thrilled to meet you the moment I heard about your quirk, the principal said right after a sip of tea. It is, indeed, an interesting one. Izuku agreed, staring at the greenish liquid he was holding. Interesting, not good. Not bad, just interesting. I can only imagine the possibilities of such power. My mind had been racing with more and more of them as soon as my dear friend Shimura told me about it. Izuku saw how Tsukauchi was stiff at his seat. It only proved what Izuku had in mind. It was not going to be a pleasant meeting. I can't do much, actually. I mean, it really is not useful to any area, so it's not like it means anything. It is only interesting, like you said, Izuku, after realizing how casual he had been, added. Sir, Nedzu laughed, as if this entire situation was amusing. Come on, Midoriya, you are a smart boy. I saw those analysis of yours. Quite impressive for somebody that had never had a lesson about quirk theories nor analysis, may I add. If you have the proper education, your quirk can be one of the most useful the hero community would ever see. Had he said hero, I am sorry, sir, I don't actually understand. Izuku felt so stupid. He had no idea what the principal was talking about. My quirk is not that good to fight, so I wouldn't be that much of a nonsense. Nedzu interrupted him. Look at me, for example. I am a hero, but my quirk is not physical, it is mental. Do you know what it is? Izuku denied with his head, but Nedzu didn't seem offended. It is called high spec. I have an advanced brain, making me capable of picturing several possible scenarios. It is not made to fight, but it makes me capable of defeating villains, nonetheless. But my quirk isn't such an amazing quirk as yours. I don't have high specs, Izuku replied, already feeling the thoughts rushing through his brain. Was that why Nedzu looked like an animal? Like, he could actually be one, if his quirk made him more intelligent. Had he always had his quirk? If so, why was his body mutated? Well, take our teacher, Eraserhead. Have you heard about him? Yes, his quirk allows him to incapacitate other people's quirk, which makes it easier for him to fight. But he also has limitations. If you didn't know, he cannot erase any mutation quirk, which means he relies on his own fighting techniques. I don't actually see how my quirk relates to it. Sir, sorry. No need to apologize. Nedzu seemed amused. I am a teacher, after all. It's my job to make sure you are well informed. The principal took another sip and then rested his cup at the table. First of all, a quirk like yours would be great for situations where the villain has a destructive quirk. If you could steal it during a battle, it could potentially save many lives. But, is this legal? I mean, stealing people's quirks. Do you know what a hero license is? Yes, I do, Izuku answered. He felt dumb. He knew hero licenses allowed the owner to use his quirk in the name of public good. But it didn't seem like something like this would be legal. I understand your confusion, especially when there is no mention to a quirk like yours anywhere. But if the information I've seen is correct, you can give those quirks back, right? Izuku confirmed. The pieces were starting to get themselves together. He felt so stupid. Truly, it had been so obvious, but at the same time it seemed so surreal. Yes, he had dreamed of becoming a hero. It was what he had ever wanted. But at the same time, it also felt like it was unreachable. It was something he liked to fantasize about. Thoughts he used to put himself to sleep. When he actually thought that this dream had turned into a possibility, it seemed like it was fragile, like it could break. Would he even be good at it? Would people enjoy his work? What if he couldn't sustain himself? Yeah, heroes were good, but there are many out there, and they were paid for acting upon things, not only for being there. Was this actually happening? Was he having a breakdown in the middle of a meeting? He closed his eyes as he felt the urge to cry. He was scared. There were people that actually believed he could become a hero, which also meant that there were more people he could disappoint. Why had he even said that to Detective Tsukauchi? He was so scared. Hey, kid, the detective's voice reached him. What's the problem? Izuku couldn't speak. He didn't want to make Tsukauchi upset. I think the boy needs time to process this information, Detective Tsukauchi. Would you be so kind to take him home? Sure thing, Nedzu. Izuku got up as fast as he could. Why was he reacting like that? That was his dream. He swallowed hard as he walked with Detective Tsukauchi to the car. He was an idiot. If Katsuki Bakugo didn't know better, he could have sworn he was a dick. It was Wednesday, which meant he had to go to the school filled with extras. The problem was, after what happened the day before, he had no idea what the hell he was supposed to do. He couldn't call Deku anymore. He had a quirk, and, as most as he would never admit it, was a quirk that scared him. He got to school more pissed than usual. He didn't need anybody else to make him angrier. He felt a little better when Deku entered the classroom looking like shit. He wanted the nerd to feel as shitty as he had felt during that. He was better than Deku, which meant it was only fair he felt the same way. When class ended, Katsuki didn't want to talk to anyone nor go home. Instead, he just started walking across town, trying to calm himself down. He didn't even notice where he was going, until he listened to a familiar voice. Deku. He just got ready to walk away until he heard somebody else's voice. They do have a counselor that you could talk to. I don't know if I want to talk about that to anybody, Deku answered. Katsuki got closer. He didn't know who the person was since both of them were hidden behind a pile of garbage. But he got closer, making sure that they couldn't see him. He was curious. Whatever it was, maybe it was something he could use against Deku if the nerd ever tried to steal his quirk again. I don't like the idea that you are dealing with this all alone, the mysterious voice said. I am not dealing with this alone. Sir, I told you about it. Don't even try. First of all, I am not a therapist. Second, you did everything you could to avoid telling me what triggered you to do that. The nerd stopped talking. Had he done something bad? Was Deku in trouble? Katsuki thought while a small smile rushed through his face. You had a panic attack last night about things that you shouldn't. Try to deny it as much as you like, but you can't make me believe you are not mentally drained. That is nothing, sir. I'm used to it. No, you're not, the man said. And even if you were, you shouldn't be. No, Midoriya, the man said with a peaceful voice. It is not normal for a 14-year-old kid to try to kill himself. To try what? I swore I wouldn't try that again. I promise I wasn't lying. The nerd had tried to kill himself. It doesn't mean you shouldn't seek help. Nezu offered that. You won't even have to pay. Please, try it. When had that happened? Please, Midoriya. I don't want to have to worry about having you jumping off a roof again. Jumping off a roof. Katsuki got away as fast as he could. No, he had to have understood it wrong. The nerd hadn't actually followed his advice, had him? A weird pain embraced Katsuki's throat as he made his way home. What the fuck had he done? Izuku had no idea 10 months could pass so quickly, but it did. Izuku had been training every day since the meeting with Principal Nezu. His body was way stronger than it once was, and he could already see a bit of muscle whenever he was wearing a t-shirt. Another reason why it could have passed so quickly was because the bullying wasn't so bad after everything. For some reason, Kacchan had stopped messing with him. Izuku was pretty sure it was because of the whole stealing his quirk part, but he wasn't going to ask him. And, apparently, the other people at his school didn't know exactly what he was capable of and stopped teasing him, for whatever reason, so this last 10 months were like a dream, too good to be true and felt like it could vanish at any second. He didn't train with Mr. Tsukauchi, though. His friend, Mr. Shimura, was the one helping Izuku to train. At first he didn't seem very pleased by that, which Izuku completely understood. He must have had better things to do, instead of being a babysitter for a stupid kid. But as time passed, the slightly bothered skeleton-like man started to grow fond of the kid. Toshinori didn't know exactly what it was, but after some months seeing the boy every day, talking to him, seeing how he reacted to the training, understanding his way of thinking, he just couldn't deny the kid had the potential to become an amazing hero one day. The investigation on All for One being connected to this kid turned out to be a dead end. Toshinori even asked the boy's mother about her husband, to which she responded with a sad look at her face that she wasn't able to contact him for years now. Weirdly enough, the money he'd always sent home kept coming as if they still talked regularly. But when Tsukauchi tried tracing where it came from, it was such a complex transaction, involving several banks in several countries, that it made the mission impossible. Toshinori still felt like the kid was somehow connected. His quirk was just too similar to All for One for it to be a coincidence. And, yes, he still wasn't sure the kid would be safe, but Nezu had been able to calm him down. More than that, the principal had made him feel hope, something he'd never thought he would have been able to feel again. There was this one time when he considered giving one for all to the kid, but something deep inside his guts made him snap out of it. It was too risky. Besides, Nezu had already a candidate to be the next holder, so he would at least give this Tagata kid a chance. The thing was, All Might didn't feel so lost anymore. He hadn't had nearly as much panic attacks about his health, and, for Christ's sake, there were days he actually felt eager to teach the kid new fighting techniques. And the boy learned fast. If he didn't know about the boy's quirk, he could have easily guessed it was some sort of intelligence one, just like Nezu's. He absorbed every single piece of information Toshinori would give him, from the 4 different ways to fall safely, to the best way to punch someone without hurting yourself so badly. And, even though the kid lacked strength, he more than made it up with pure will. Toshinori was proud. Izuku was proud too, but it had been a hard path. He had been consulting with Hound Dog once every week. At first he wanted to ask Principal Nezu why were him doing all of that for him. Was he really worth all the trouble? He didn't felt like that. But then Hound Dog helped him. He had never had such great confidence before. It wasn't even near Kacchan's, but it was really better than before. For once in his life he actually believed he was worth somebody else's time and effort. He could speak without stuttering. It now only happened when he was nervous, and, more than that, he was happy. Actually happy. Not that I just eat something delicious, I am so happy kind of happiness. He woke up every day and didn't felt like he had always felt. Trash. Some useless piece of garbage. He was smiling more, laughing more, and having fun more often. It all felt amazing. On the other hand, the last 10 months were Katsuki's hell on earth. He was drowning in a weird kind of sadness. It wasn't like wanting to cry now and then, even though he also felt like it. But whenever he ate something it felt like it had turned into styrofoam. Whenever he woke up, it was like he almost felt disappointed, like he was not worthy of getting out of bed and going to school. There were days he even believed he wasn't the best hero candidate at that school. Like, there were people that had fitting quirks too, right? There were days he felt like it wasn't even worth it. His parents had tried talking to him a few times, even scheduled some appointments with a goddamn shrink, as if he needed one. No, he didn't. It would pass, eventually. He remembered that there were some times when he was younger that he felt like that. It would usually pass within a week, so it was annoying as hell that it had already lasted 2 months. But whatever, he didn't need a person to tell him what he already knew. The entrance exam at UA would be in 2 weeks. He needed to train. He hadn't really used his quirk the last few months. It just didn't feel right. Katsuki decided to go to Takoba Beach. He could blow some things up. Maybe it would help him clear the things he was feeling. After all, he walked calmly, hand in his pockets, a frown at his face. Everything would be all right. The moment he got to the beach, though, everything was clean. How had that happened? He hadn't seen any news about cleaning the beach, but he wasn't really watching that much TV either, so it didn't matter. It just meant he would have to find new things to blow. The recommendation exam happened a week before the regular one. Izuku was buzzing with anxiety and energy the moment Detective Tsukauchi pulled in front of his apartment. Izuku didn't know what they were going to do, but obviously it would require some physical exercises, so he just grabbed some sweatshirt and pants before kissing his mom on the cheek and heading out to the UA grounds. Tsukauchi was trying to help him calm down. He said that he didn't have to worry, but Midoriya knew he was just being polite. There would be people with amazing quirks, and, overall, quirks that they knew how to use way better than Izuku. A part of him was excited to be able to see and perhaps use some of this super cool quirks. It was just amazing. He got inside the building for the welcoming ceremony and felt his breathing stop. There were a lot of people. Of course, it wouldn't be like the public exam, but still, there were about 200 people around there. And there were only 4 slots for recommendation students. Okay, everybody, are you ready? The loud, deafening voice of Present Mike echoed around the hall. No one responded. Present Mike mumbled something before speaking again. But Izuku could only think about his quirk's possibilities. The recommendation exam consists of 3 parts. Number 1, the written exam. Number 2, the practical exam. Number 3, the interview. He stopped talking for a moment. Each part will eliminate unfitting students. The minimum you must score at the written exam is 60% of the total number of questions. The 60 with best grades will pass to the next test. And then 20 people will qualify for the interview. Several people started whispering to one another. Only 10% of the people currently in the room would be able to reach the last level. Oh no, Izuku's stomach started aching. He tried to calm himself down. After all, if he wasn't able to pass the recommendation exam, he could also try the regular one. Going against a lot more people, Izuku swallowed hard while he walked to the room he was supposed to take the written exam. He breathed deeply while trying to calm himself down. Better safe than sorry, right? The written exam took longer than Izuku expected. There had been 10 questions of each mandatory subject. Japanese, mathematics, a foreign language. Izuku chose English, physics, chemistry, biology, geography, and history. By the end of it, Izuku's stomach was aching, and all he wanted was to eat something. He was locked for 5 hours inside a classroom filled with other people. When he finished the test 1 hour earlier than expected, he felt scared. What the hell did that mean? Had he at least gotten all of them correctly? But then, the tests had started around 7 a.m., and now it was 12 p.m., which meant not only Izuku, but everybody around there was starving. Present Mike led them to the cafeteria, so all of the candidates would be able to have lunch. Izuku chose to eat something light. He didn't want to feel sick once he started the physical exam, and he wasn't sure how long it'd take. He was sitting at a random table. There were a few people around him too. Most of them didn't seem to have mutant quirks, which was kind of bad for Izuku. He needed to see if there was some quirk that he could use during the practical exam. Is this seat taken? This guy with a face that resembled a skeleton asked him. Not at all, Izuku answered as he kept staring at the boy's face. He knew it would be considered rude, but he was so curious. I know my face isn't pleasant, the boy said while avoiding looking at Izuku's face. And no, I mean, that's not why I was looking, I swear. Izuku replied while gesturing widely. I was just, curious, if it is related somehow to your quirk and all. Smooth, very smooth. I'm Izuku Midoriya, by the way, he added while standing his hand to greet the boy. I'm Juzo Honuki, he said. And, no, it's not related to my quirk. Izuku was about to apologize for making Honuki uncomfortable, but he was interrupted by a small green-haired girl. Oh, you have green hair too, she said while coming to sit near Izuku. Izuku wasn't sure how to react. He wasn't used to people approaching him like that. He realized the girl had long and pointy teeth and seemed really extroverted. Satsuna Takage, she said, flashing a weird and threatening smile. After that, everything went silently. Izuku wanted to ask about their quirks, but he wasn't actually sure they would enjoy the question. They were probably relying on the surprise element. 1 hour later, the exam's results were there. Izuku could barely breathe as he waited for the crowd to slowly fade. With several people going away, some were angry, some were sad, but the difference between those who passed and the ones who didn't was as clear as water. He felt happy when he saw the 2 people that had lunched near him passed. When he finally got near the board with the names, he started looking for his name. It was in grade order, so he started by the lowest. His heart started beating furiously when he couldn't see his name. He was already at the 20th position, and nothing yet. He thought he was going to faint when he finally saw his name at the top 10. He was so happy that he went to the next round that he couldn't even think about the fact that he was one of the people with the highest scores. He was the 6th with higher scores. He couldn't keep his curious self to look who got the highest score. Momoye Urazu, he muttered while kept staring. That would be me. This girl said right behind Izuku. She was almost 10 centimeters taller than Izuku, which was a little bit embarrassing. Congratulations for your score. It had been almost perfect. She had scored 98% of the total, which was really impressive according to Izuku's conception. Thank you, but it doesn't mean that much. The physical exam is completely independent, which means our scores don't mean a thing. The 60 of us are going to start from scratch now. Izuku gulped. He had had a good score, which could have been useful. Now, he relied completely on his physical abilities and his quirk, which weren't that well developed as he hoped they were. It meant he had a disadvantage when compared to the others. Izuku breathed heavily. He was already used to be at disadvantage. All he could do now was hope he would still be able to stay amongst the 20 people that were going to the interview. Izuku was getting desperate by the second. He was on the last group to participate at the test, but it only made him more worried. Everybody knew how to use their quirks and it was terrifying, especially when he wasn't sure what he'd do. The groups were formed accordingly to the written exam's results. The people who scored lowest would go first, each group being divided into 6 people. Izuku was slightly glad he was at the last group, though. It meant people wouldn't be looking when he lost. And being the last one to compete also meant he could analyze other people's ways to completing the course. There were so many obstacles that it seemed impossible to actually complete it. Normal race, mountain climbing, swimming, and, for the love of God, a castle. Honuki's team was right before Izuku's. He couldn't keep his eyes out of the track. He had no idea what he would have to face, honestly, but he had his mind racing with possibilities. Izuku kept looking as 3 people started approaching the end line. Honuki was in second, while this boy with an ice quirk came in first by gliding over the ice. This was such a strong quirk. Then, out of nowhere, another boy started coming. Better yet, flying. The quirk had something to do with wind, obviously from the glacial air current. Izuku felt the gears in his brain click as the plan started forming at his mind. It would be risky, especially since he had no training with this other quirks, but, well, he was authorized to use his quirk, after all. He could give them back once he was done using them. The wind guy and the ice guy were tied. Izuku had no idea who was going to win, but it didn't take long before a whistle announced the end, declaring the wind guy victorious. Izuku felt his heartbeat all around his body as he realized what he was going to do. It was terrifying, but he couldn't disappoint Mr. Tsukauchi. He started walking at the ice guy's direction. Was it normal to feel that dizzy? He grabbed the boy's head out of nowhere while looked at him in the eye. He could see the confused and pissed look at his face. It was a really good race. Congratulations. Was it normal to feel your stomach sink like that? Whatever. The boy took his hand from Izuku's grip, but it had been enough. Izuku could already feel the new sensation inside of him. It was now part 2 of the plan. He ran towards Honuki. He did the same thing he did to the other boy, but this time instead of an angry look he got only a slightly uncomfortable one. He just hoped Honuki wouldn't be pissed at him for doing that. He had seen how the 2 boys used his quirk for a small stretch. He also pondered stealing the wind guy's quirk, but it seemed to be way more difficult to master, and he didn't want to worry about it during the race. Izuku tried calming himself down. He had already done that. He knew how to use one quirk at a time. There was no problem, right? He wouldn't get hurt, at least not too much. He positioned himself at the start line. He felt tremulous, but as soon as Present Mike's voice auto-rated the countdown, this weird piece took control of his body. He smiled slightly. Everything would be fine. Ready, set. Izuku exhaled, feeling as ready as he would ever be. Go. The first few seconds of the race left Izuku behind. He wasn't going to use the quirks yet. He needed to make sure he didn't get too tired at the beginning. And since he had no training with those quirks, well, he wasn't going to throw this chance away. It was a 3-kilometer race. If Izuku had figured it correctly, there were 8 different parts. The first one was a normal race, followed by some sort of platforms where they needed to jump. It led to the dirt track, followed by the castle and then the mountain. After that it was the forest. It seemed to have water there. Izuku couldn't tell. His only clue was some wet participants at the end, so it was safe to say that they had some sort of aquatic test. It all led to the air jets and, finally, back to a normal track so they could reach the end line. He was the last by the time he got to the next obstacle. Izuku started thinking as fast as he could as he carefully jumped to the platforms. He would have to compensate for it as soon as possible. His heart was beating so hard that he could feel it without any effort. The dirt track was harder than Izuku had expected. It was muddy, and there were 2 other participants that fell on the ground, probably because they tried to move too fast. Izuku took it as his chance. He put his right hand and foot slightly back, as he had seen the ice boy do, sensing that quirk inside of him, instinctively activating it. He should have calmed himself down before doing it. The ice was furiously making Izuku rush right to the castle walls. Even though he wanted to stop, it just wouldn't. Oh, no, 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 no. Izuku muttered as he prepared himself for the impact. It never came. Actually, his body had changed to Honuki's quirk without Izuku even realizing. Almost as if his instincts made the one that best fit the situation to activate. He was definitely going to register that as soon as he got home. The wall, or at least what was supposed to be a wall, was now melted on the ground. Izuku felt a rush of joy as he ran as fast as he could through an empty hall to the opposite wall, using Honuki's quirk to open a new hole so he would be able to go to the next obstacle. The mountain. Izuku was terrible at climbing mountains, differently from Katsuki, who found it very amusing. Izuku needed to say that. Now he was using a quirk that actually helped with it. It really was amusing. He had never imagined a softening quirk would be so useful, but he had never really thought about it either. He made sure to open holes big enough so he could fit his hands and then his feet. Izuku passed by another person, putting him in 3rd place. The rush of adrenaline made him tremble a bit. It was weird, but also an amazing feeling. He could understand now the appeal of extreme sports. It was addictive. He ran through the rope bridges that connected the mountains, which seemed like a good idea but actually wasn't. As soon as he reached the other mountain's peak, Izuku looked down. If he used the same method that he had used for climbing, it would take too long. The boy made a silent prayer and touched the floor with his right side. Here goes nothing, Izuku muttered right before activating the ice powers, creating a slide that felt a little too dangerous. Izuku was cold, and the freezing water from the lake he landed on did not help at all. His teeth creaked as he, weakly, swam to the shore. His arms and legs felt a bit numb. He wasn't sure what he was going to do about his clothes if he actually passed to the next stage. But he couldn't worry about that now. He needed to focus. He was shivering so bad that, for a moment, the only thing he could do was sit and hug his wet body. Izuku knew he needed to keep going, but it felt impossible. Suddenly, a hiss called his attention. The water at his pants, to be more specific, where his left hand was positioned, was evaporating. What the hell? Izuku's brain started working faster. It seemed so ridiculous he hadn't realized it earlier. The boy had only used his right side when he used his quirk. Coincidentally, it was the side that had white hair. Now, if Izuku's line of thought was correct, his left side, the red side, meant fire. Izuku saw the flames burning bright at his left hand. Miraculously, it didn't burn. Was it part of his quirk? Did he also steal the person's physical adaptations that helped them endure their quirks? If it was that, Izuku had so many questions. Did his quirk mess with people's genetics? Would that be problematic if he used his quirk during a long period of time? Or was his body made to endure it? Focus, Izuku thought as he got up. He had an exam to finish. It was now jet time. Izuku got out of the forest as soon as he could. He knew the jets were blowing air, but he had no idea if it was hot air or cold air. He wasn't sure which one would be the worst since he was still wet from his dive. The moment he got there, he saw the 2 participants in front of him. One was Yaoyorozu, in second, and the other one he couldn't tell by view, but if he remembered correctly it was some guy with a mutant quirk. Izuku felt the despair rush through him. He was in 3rd place, and if he was correct, only the 2 firsts would move to the next stage. He tried using the ice to slide through the jets, only to realize they were hot and melted his ice before he could get to the other side. The boy started running for his life. He had to get there. He couldn't disappoint everyone that had believed he was capable of doing it. His last bit of hope died once he saw Yaoyorozu cross the line. He couldn't help but cry. That was it. That was the end. He had lost. Izuku was angry and sad and frustrated. He would have a second chance, but it wouldn't be the same. Something deep inside him said that this defeat was more than just an exam. It was the proof that in the middle of all those people with potential, he hadn't any. Okay, everybody, the test is over. We'll give you the results in a minute, President Mike said while going inside a room, leaving the kids to rest and catch their breath. Izuku just wanted to go home, but he had to find the ice guy. He didn't even know his name. And Honuki. They needed their quirks, after all. Izuku didn't even had to look for the ice guy. He was coming in his direction, a serious look at his face. The scar on his left side only made things more terrifying. Excuse me, do you have a quirk just like mine? The guy's voice was calm, weirdly calm. Oh, hi. Izuku was holding back the tears he so desperately wanted to shed. I'm so sorry I stole your quirk, but since you had already finished the test I thought it wouldn't make things harder for you. I promise I wasn't trying to keep it or anything. The other kid just stared at him, something racing on his mind. You can steal quirks, was the only thing he said. Izuku agreed, and the boy went silent again. The mood wasn't getting any better. My quirk. I have an ice and fire quirk. Would you be able to take only one of them? Izuku wasn't sure why he was asking that, but he thought that maybe he was just curious. Well, actually no. If you had 2 quirks, perhaps. But you only have one. It's all or nothing, I can't split it. The other just nodded in silence. I'm Izuku Midoriya, by the way, he said while putting his hand at the boys. Shoto Todoroki. The name Todoroki seemed familiar, but Izuku couldn't place it with the blood pounding on his ears. He gave Todoroki's quirk back and smiled. He needed to find Honuki now. After that he would go home. Perhaps his mom would make some katsudon for dinner so he wouldn't be so sad. He gave Honuki's quirk back and apologized profusely. The boy said it was okay, but it was best to be sure, right? A few minutes later, Present Mike got out of the room he had been, bringing a sheet of paper with him, putting it on a board. Izuku knew it made no sense. Why would he check the paper if he knew his name wouldn't be there? He ran through the names. Honuki's were there, and Todoroki's too. Even that girl's, Takage, was there. But he couldn't see his name anywhere. He hadn't passed. Izuku just started walking out of there. He felt terrible, really. But he was stopped by Present Mike's voice. So, apparently the candidate in Sayurashi has given up and there's a new slot. The temperature seemed to have dropped in a matter of seconds. Izuku realized that Urashi had been the first one at the list. The one with the best score. Why the hell would he give up such a unique opportunity? The one that's going to replace him will be. No one seemed to breathe. Izuku was sure that he would faint from the anxiety. But he didn't. And he didn't even faint when he heard his name coming out of Present Mike's mouth. Hey, he did it. He actually had a chance. Izuku held happy tears as he got inside the building, to be with the other 19 people that would wait for the interview. He felt like he could fly. He had made it. Ectoplasm was the one waiting for them at the waiting area. He grinned before starting to speak. Okay, people, until now it has been easy. The 3rd stage begins now. Izuku felt so uncomfortable with those clothes. They were dirty, wet, and overall stinky. He knew he wasn't the only one that felt like that. The disgusted faces of other people around the room and how everybody just seemed to keep a few meters between them and other people really showed. He was so embarrassed to meet Principal Nezu like this. Izuku had only met him once, and it really didn't went that well, considering the principal had offered him therapy for free. The interviews were made in order. The ones that had scored higher went first, meaning Izuku was the last one. These interviews would vary from 5 to 10 minutes, basically meaning that Izuku was already waiting for a little more than 2 hours. It didn't help his anxiety. As he saw the last person before him leave the room, Izuku got up, feeling a rush of energy. That was it. He entered the room to see the animalistic principal sipping on his tea. Good afternoon, Midoriya. The principal's voice was polite and calm. He didn't seem tired at all, which really made Izuku more self-conscious. Gee, good afternoon, sir. Would you be so kind to sit? Izuku took the spot at the chair. His clothes stopped being wet and were just humid. Now, I watched your race, and, to be honest, I see you had an amazingly fast thought process. I just did what I saw the others were doing. To be fair, Izuku wasn't lying. He'd saw how Honuki and Todoroki had used their quirks and adapted them to his situation. It was just basic logic. Nothing impressive. If he was actually impressive, he would have been between the 21st. Still, to be able to control not only 1 but 2 quirks you had seen for a short period is something to be proud of. Izuku smiled a bit. He felt glad Nezu thought he was impressive. Perhaps it could compensate for his lack of trainment. Or not. There were still 19 people that had completed the track faster. After all, time meant everything when talking about hero work. Thank you, sir. To be fair, this interview is not necessary. The words made Izuku freeze. Was that Nezu's way of telling him he wouldn't pass? Oh, crap. He couldn't cry now, could he? Seeing I already know you and your skills from our last meeting and that interesting notebook of yours Tsukauchi brought me. Oh, I see. Izuku felt relieved. I have only one question for you. Is that okay? Izuku agreed vigorously. What are your expectations for the hero course? Oh, well, that was tricky. Izuku hadn't thought about it a lot. He knew he would learn several things, from laws to fighting techniques. But he had never really thought about the hero course specifically. He just assumed it would be the same from school. When he thought about becoming a hero, he always thought about the time he would be working, not the process. I hope to become a better fighter, to make sure I am able to fight villains and make sure I can do my best to protect everybody. He thought it was a good answer. He really did. But Nezu didn't seem to like it that much. Is there something wrong, sir? Don't get me wrong, Midoriya. That is a great thing to want, but your only focus is that. The future. Don't you want to make friends, people that will be able to help you when you're older? Enjoy the time you're still a student. Why was that a topic? Izuku had no idea why Nezu was talking about that, but wasn't he right? During these last months, Izuku had learned what it meant to have friends, even if those friends were older. Having friends his own age seemed almost Wrong. He knew it was just his inner Katsuki talking to him. Hound Dog had really helped him to make this part of him, the one that thought he was useless, unworthy, fade, but it wouldn't just disappear. Maybe he would always have this part of him, the one that doubted people actually could like him. Don't forget that being a hero means helping people. You have to have friends, people around you. They are a way for you to remember that the lives endangered by villains are precious. If you don't worry about other people, if your only goal is to become a hero, you could act wrongly in a hostage situation, for example. That makes sense, Izuku admitted. He had never thought about it, to be fair. I hope you keep that in mind when you get home today, Nezu said while smiling. That would be all for today. Thank you for your patience. Izuku got up and followed the principal to the door. The letter informing you of your results will be posted by the end of the week. That was the last thing Nezu said before closing the door. Izuku went to the lockers where he had put his phone when he got there by the morning. It was weird. It seemed like a much longer time had passed. He turned his cell phone on and dialed Tsukauchi's number. There were 2 rings before the familiar voice answered it. Hey, kid, are you done there? Yes, I am. Izuku smiled when he noticed the excitement in the detective's voice. So, I'll know by the end of the week. I have no doubts you are going to pass, boy. Izuku felt a warm feeling at his heart. Tsukauchi believed him. I'm going there now. We can go dine together with Mr. Shimura. And your mom, of course. I'd love that. But I really need a shower now, Izuku said while cleaning some tears. He wasn't sure if they were from happiness or fatigue. Katsuki was wandering around the streets. It was Saturday night, but it didn't mean he was having fun. Actually, he was trying to distract himself from the weird feeling that got worse whenever he remembered the entrance exam next weekend. What was wrong with him? He knew he was going to win. It was obvious. He had the perfect quirk. But why was he so upset? Whenever he thought about the exam, he just felt tired. He thought about Deku too. Would he try the exam? Katsuki hoped not. He didn't want someone with that quirk to be allowed to use it legally. It would be bad. Nothing good could come out of that. Katsuki didn't even realize that he was near Deku's house until he heard his voice. Thankfully it was dark and he could easily hide himself in the shadows. I'm so happy for you, baby. Auntie Midoriya's voice was shaky while she hugged her son, giving him a forehead kiss. Come on, Mom, it doesn't mean anything. The nerd answered as he ran towards a man leaning in a car. Bullshit, the man said while giving Deku a high five and then hugging him. Was that Deku's dad? I'm sure next week we will have the confirmation and then you are going to have to endure lots of hugs and kisses from your mom. Mr. Tsukauchi is right, Inko answered. Not the dad, apparently, but what the hell were they talking about? Let's go before we can't find a table. I'm paying, after all, the man said, letting them enter the back of the car. Katsuki had a weird feeling that things were wrong. He couldn't explain it exactly, but he was sure things felt off. Had he done something to piss God? Well, he had made Deku almost die, hadn't he? Perhaps he should just accept it. Except he had screwed up and, for fuck's sake, do something. He would never say something like that again. That was obvious, but it wasn't enough. He'd have to prove he was no longer a bad person. And was there any better way to prove that than becoming a hero? Heroes helped people, didn't they? He would become a hero and prove he was no bad person. That gave him the motivation to go back home and rest. He would become the best fucking hero this world had ever seen. He would be even greater than All Might. Then he would prove he wasn't a bad person. After all, how would the #1 hero ever be a bad person? Toshinori Yagi wanted to calm the boy down. It was now Friday and Midoriya was about to lose his shit. Toshinori knew he couldn't tell the boy would be accepted. Tsukauchi made sure he remembered that when he went to the kid's house by the end of the day, it could ruin everything. Toshinori felt bad. He wanted to tell the kid the dangers that he could expect once he got into the hero course, especially after he got his license. The thing that was bothering Yagi the most was the sports festival. The kid couldn't go to the individual fights. It would expose him to the entire country. But it could also be a catalyzer for the investigation. Toshinori was divided. One part wanted to help the kid. The other wanted to help society. Nezu had promised that, if the boy was able to pass the 2 first stages, he would guarantee his spot at UA. It wasn't reassuring, though. At the beginning, 10 months ago, Toshinori didn't want to risk everybody else's lives. The kid was a danger, a weapon too powerful to be put into battle. But then Tsukauchi had made him train the kid with the support of Nezu. If Tsukauchi only planned for the kid to be trained, there were other options, better options. But he wanted Toshinori to teach him. It had been a trap. Toshinori got to meet the boy, learn about what he'd been through. He had grown up quirkless, just like Toshinori. He had dreamt of becoming a hero, just like Toshinori. It was impossible not to see the similarities between them. It was almost like they were meant to meet. And no, it didn't make Toshinori any less calm. If anything, it only made him worry even more. He was the 8th holder of One for All. He was supposed to meet the holder of All for One, and that could be the original brother, or his familiar, but he didn't want it to hurt the kid. He didn't want Midoriya to feel like he was in danger. The best option would be to keep silent for as long as possible. The bright smile that met him when the Midoriya's apartment door opened was almost blinding. The boy had puffy eyes and cheeks, but that smile. He was happy. "I made it," the kid almost screamed. "I got in. Congratulations, my boy," Toshinori said while doing his best to fake surprise. He thanked all those years around the media for giving him enough training. "Tsukauchi asked me to tell you he was sorry he couldn't make it here today. He got stuck at work." "Oh, that's fine. So, can I see the letter?" Yagi smiled when the kid gestured for him to come in, leading the way towards his bedroom. He was in shock the moment he entered the room. It wasn't like he didn't know Midoriya was a fan of his, All Might's actually. The boy had talked so much about All Might when they were together, but he would never imagine that he had so many merch. He probably had more All Might stuff than Toshinori himself. "You were really an All Might fan, huh, boy?" Izuku got as red as a tomato. Yeah, I guess, haha." The boy scratched his neck vigorously and gave Toshinori the holographic disc. He saw the recording of himself in his muscular form welcoming Midoriya to UA. The boy seemed to hold back tears as All Might said he was going to become a hero. Toshinori felt an urge to just tell him personally, but no, Tsukauchi would kill him. Besides, he would have plenty of time at UA to tell him that. Yagi put his hand at Midoriya's shoulder and returned to the living room. "Good luck, kid," he thought to himself. "You're going to need it." Katsuki felt good, which was a weird feeling after all that time. He had blown up a bunch of robots, and, fuck, it helped. He really just needed to vent his anger. It was good to feel like he was the best again. None of those extras he made the test with had gotten close to his punctuation. 70 points. That was quite a score. He felt the hot water washing away all the sweat and dirt that had been making him itchy. It was so good to feel like this. The sore muscles after physical activities. It didn't bother him at all. Katsuki slipped under his blanket and yawned. He was really tired. His results would come out in a few weeks, but he wasn't anxious at all. They would be idiots if they didn't accept him. Izuku's heart was filled with yearn. That was his first day at school. More than that, at a new school, with a quirk of his own, with no reason to feel anxious about anything. If he didn't remember, he could end up meeting Katsuki. The only other time he talked with Bakugo had been soon after the public entrance exam results had been disclosed. He saw Kacchan's reaction to him entering UA. Not by the public exam, but the recommendation one. Honestly, it could have been a lot worse. He could have been beaten up, but Kacchan just ignored him, as he had ignored him for the rest of the year. He just hoped people would be nicer to him now. Maybe he could actually make some friends, just like Nenzu had said. He had thought about his conversation with the principal more than he would have liked to admit. Not that it was a bad thing, but, well, after analyzing Nenzu's words and doing some research on human psychology, Izuku had understood what he actually meant. And he was right. Hound Dog was another one that actually helped him. The counselor said he was extremely happy Izuku had gotten into UA, since he would now be able to accompany his growth as not only a better person, but a hero. He was a weird person, but a good one, definitely. Everything seemed perfect, until he got inside his classroom. Obviously, he had to be at Katsuki's class. He had a 50-50 chance. Fate liked to play games with him. He recognized Todoroki. He was sitting at the back of the class and, oh, even that girl Yaoyorozu was there. But, was that right? He didn't remember seeing her name on the third stage list. She had probably taken the regular exam then. Izuku couldn't help but shrink slightly as he passed near a fuming Katsuki. Old habits were hard to forget. The moment he sat on the chair, they saw something weird at the door. Was that a man in a sleeping bag? At the school, the man got out of the yellow sleeping bag, but it didn't help that much since his clothes didn't make him look less lost. He finished stretching his arms as he looked at the classroom filled with silence. "I'm your homeroom teacher, Shota Aizawa. Pleasure meeting you," he said before leaning towards his bag and looking for something inside of it. When he finally found it, he looked at the students holding a blue gym uniform with the UA initials dyed in white. "Wear these immediately, and then shove off to the PE grounds." Everybody went to the locker rooms and changed. No one seemed to understand exactly what they were going to do. Izuku was excited, though. It was still surreal, and that made it seem a little bit more possible. He got to the PE area with some of the other students, feeling his heart race with anticipation. "We are going to do a quirk apprehension test." As the words came out of the teacher's mouth, Izuku's thrill turned into despair. Oh no. If Izuku had any hope left, it was all crushed the moment he heard the word expelled coming from Mr. Aizawa's mouth. What was he supposed to do? It wasn't like anybody would want to help him. Nobody would like to be expelled, so the obvious solution would be let him, the one with the useless quirk, fail. Thankfully, he was not the last one at the 50-meter dash. This weird guy, Minta, was the one that took the longest. Apparently having small legs kept him behind. And Izuku was kinda glad he had so many experiences running away from people. He actually thought he had a chance when he wasn't the last. It had been that Hagakure girl at the strength test too. He was so glad Mr. Shimura had trained him. But things started going downhill during the standing long jump. He got the last position, and then he got the last position again at the sustained sideways jumps, which made him the one with the lowest position. He was tired. His body was buzzing with adrenaline as he thought about what he was going to tell Mr. Tsukauchi and Mr. Shimura, and his mom. When Mr. Aizawa started the last exercise, Izuku just stood there. He was hoping to see what the others were doing, if he could only get some points. But still, he had a 2 out of 20 chance of being tied with Mindo or Hagakure. It meant an 18 out of 20 chance of him actually being expelled. He saw the board look at Aizawa's face and his brain started aching. He needed to do something. He didn't want it to lose now. The idea came as soon as Uraraka, if he remembered it correctly, finished her throw. No, he shouldn't. It was no guarantee that he wouldn't get expelled. It just meant he wouldn't end the test at last. It would be bad. But hadn't Aizawa said that this was a quirk apprehension test? He was supposed to use his quirk, and getting it wouldn't lower Uraraka's score. After all, she had already ended up her tests. Now, if he was going to do that, he couldn't tell her. Nor could he let Katsuki see him doing it, since he already knew what Izuku was capable of. So that was it. Hound Dog would probably say it was a poor decision to make. And Izuku knew that. He knew too well. Even knowing that he would obviously return her quirk back, he would still be doing something to her body. Something he didn't have the permission to do. Was that really worth it? Doing something like that just for the sake of losing with his head up? It didn't feel like it. But also, if he did nothing it wouldn't mean a thing, honestly. He really could just don't do it and accept his loss anyways. But the little bit of ego inside of him growled when the thought crossed his mind. It was his quirk, wasn't it? He had passed the entrance exam with it, hadn't he? Principal Nedzu didn't complain about any single action he had taken. When he told that to Hound Dog, yeah, the man had told him the implications of his actions. It could be considered harassment, even. Heroes don't harass innocent people, Midoriya. Hound Dog's voice echoed at Izuku's head. That would go against the logic of even being one. And Izuku knew he was right. As soon as Uraraka got back from the test, he went towards her. At least he could try, right? Excuse me, Uraraka, right? She seemed confused but nodded. Since you've already finished your test. Was it normal to feel that anxious? I was wondering if I could borrow your quirk. He was waiting for her to laugh, to scream, to hit him, even, but it never happened. She just looked confused. Borrow? What do you mean? The way she spoke was so sweet, so polite. No one had ever talked to him like that before, without hatred or disgust. No one his age, at least. You see, and my quirk makes me able to steal quirks. But I can give them back, I swear. You can ask to Todoroki if you'd like. That's so cool, she said smiling. Sure, be my guest. Did that just happen? Was that girl thinking straight? Who in good consciousness would accept such a thing? Thanks. He took his hand in hers and did what he had to do. He could actually see the quirk transferring since Uraraka's pink fingertips pads started turning skin-colored while his fingertips pads started getting pink. Did that mean he would acquire mutant features if he stole a mutant quirk? Did it mean the people with mutant quirks would turn into regular people? He needed to ask Shoji or maybe Ashido if he could try that. Good luck there, Uraraka said while Izuku walked towards the ball. Izuku saw the skeptical look on Aizawa's face. He had to turn his head away to avoid those judging eyes. It felt like the teacher didn't even like him. And they hadn't even finished the first day of school. But, again, that wasn't any news. Izuku held the ball touching all 5 fingers. He felt the ball getting lighter when he wished it, and a weird feeling poked his stomach. He threw the ball as far as he could, knowing it wouldn't fall. He waited. He had realized Uraraka had waited about 10 seconds before the infinite result appeared on the teacher's phone. He waited for 9 and then released as he had seen her do before. He didn't want it to make her feel guilty. 751, 2 meters, Aizawa said, and Izuku instinctively looked at Katsuki. He could almost see the blonde fuming, but it had been the boy's only reaction. Toshinori smiled slightly. He could understand why Midoriya was so sad. He hadn't watched everything, but what he had, well, at least he had aced the last one. Aizawa couldn't actually expel the kid, so he had no worries about the boy's future. But he needed to say. Seeing his apprentice suffer made his chest ache a little. A logical ruse. Aizawa's smile was simply terrifying, Izuku realized, but he was too relieved to actually care that much. He was really starting to think there had been too many coincidences. He couldn't be that lucky, could he? Well, it didn't make sense for it to be anything more than a coincidence, so he could just forget it. What Izuku wasn't expecting was for there to be so many people that actually wanted to talk to him about his quirk. The moment he stepped into the classroom, he had been flooded with people asking him about how he was able to imitate Uraraka's quirk. And, boy, he was embarrassed to say he wasn't actually sure about his quirk's limitations. He was so unused to be that close to people, that when the day finally ended he felt like he could sleep for a week. But it was definitely not a bad thing. It would just take him some time to get used to it. See you tomorrow, Kacchan. He couldn't help but smile. Katsuki's reaction was just amazing. Izuku wasn't sure about saying anything, but, well, if Kacchan's ego was that big, why couldn't Izuku let himself show a little bit of his? Don't care, Deku, was the only thing he said before speeding his pace. It felt almost nostalgic to be called like that. Almost. It still hurt a bit, especially since he had actually been useless at the test. Without Uraraka. Hey, Deku. The girl called coming near him. She was accompanied by Ida. Deku. Izuku blushed a bit, unsure what to say. Yeah, isn't that your name? Bakugo just said it. Oh, actually. It seems to be offensive. Uraraka, Ida said while stroking his chin. Oh, I'm sorry, she said and laughed nervously. But it sounds cute. Izuku smiled. Perhaps Deku didn't need it to be an offense. He was, when talking about quirks, indeed, useless without somebody else's quirk. But it didn't make him any less capable. He could still learn how to fight. He could still help people. He had gotten into UA. For Christ's sake, he was there for his own merit. Who knows, maybe he would grow fonder of the name. As the Foundational Hero Studies teacher walked into the room, Izuku felt like he was going to pass out. The only coherent thought he could form was a repetition of the name All Might, as he tried not to scream. He didn't realize that he was muttering until Katsuki basically screamed for him to shut the fuck up, nerd. For this class, we'll be building up your hero foundation through various trials. All Might explained. You'll get lots of credits for it. So let's jump right in with this. The trial of battle. Whispers echoed around the room as everybody seemed to be excited to actually get into a fight, something Izuku wanted to avoid, at least until he got better at different fighting techniques. And to go with your first battle, we've prepared the gear we had you send in requests for to match your quirks. That was definitely going to be something. Izuku's uniform wasn't actually important since his quirk didn't ask for much. So, when his mom had came back home with a uniform based on what he had always drawn, he couldn't say no. He had just made some modifications to the gloves, making them able to protect his palm, but leaving the fingers exposed. He was proud of it. It could not be the prettiest nor the coolest, but it had been made by the only person that had ever been by his side. So, in the end, what on earth could replace it? Nothing. He rushed to get to the training grounds, but Izuku suddenly felt ashamed as he saw All Might glancing at him with a grin on his face. Toshinori, on the other hand, felt a mix of joy and tenderness. He could see Midoriya was tense. He needed to make sure to talk to him at the end of the day. This will be an indoor battle trial. The explanation was brief and then came the sorting. Toshinori couldn't help but smile as he took the clear the idea of Midoriya being a villain, even if it was just acting, was enough to make every single hair in his body stand. The moment All Might draw the black D, it was like Izuku had been punched in the guts. That was Katsuki's team. Izuku swallowed hard and avoided glancing at the blonde. He could feel the weird aura Kacchan exhaled. It made him shiver. Deku, you could steal Bakugo's quirk. Uraraka sounded excited as he got near him. We could win if you did it. Izuku thought for a bit. The memory of the last time he'd done that came to his mind. He definitely didn't want to piss Katsuki that much, especially since they were classmates and it gave him the chance of legally beating Izuku's ass. Another problem was, Katsuki was wearing gloves. Izuku didn't know if his quirk was able to steal quirks touching some other part since he had never tried it before, which seemed so stupid now. I'm not sure he would let me get close since he knows what my quirk is, he said, hoping it'd be enough to make Uraraka change the subject. Well, what about asking somebody else? Uraraka looked where the others had been standing, only to find out that they'd already left. Izuku tried calming down. That wasn't that big of a deal, was it? The alarm that indicated the beginning of the trial rang. Izuku and Uraraka got inside the building through the window using Uraraka's quirk. The halls were bland with no decoration at all. It made sense if you understood it was built for fights, but it made it harder to remember the places you had or hadn't gone. The gray walls were almost sad. A sudden explosion blew Izuku and Uraraka away, making both of them fall to the ground. It hurt. Are you okay, Uraraka? Izuku asked, realizing half of his hood had been destroyed by the massive explosion Kacchan had made. Yeah, all good. Don't dodge, Deku. Don't you have a quirk? Fucking use it. Fight me. Bakugo's eyes were weird. What the hell was he thinking? He could have actually hurt Uraraka. Go ahead, I'll meet you as soon as possible, Izuku said while getting up. He needed to make sure Katsuki's wouldn't hurt the others. Logically speaking, he was the only one that could actually make Katsuki stop exploding things up. For the good or for the bad, he was the one that had to fight Kacchan. Katsuki started throwing a punch with his right hand, just like he always did. Izuku grabbed him by the gauntlet and threw him at the ground. The judo classes he had done with Mr. Shimura were actually helpful for immobilizing people. How does my nerdy ass look like now, Kacchan? Oh, wow, Izuku didn't want it to provoke him. What the hell was he doing? As lame as ever, you bastard, Katsuki replied with, what a surprise, explosions. Was him stupid. They were at a building, for Christ's sake. Izuku got some distance between them and started thinking about what he could do. If he was able to touch Kacchan's arms or something, he could try stealing the quirk and go find Uraraka. But how would he do that? I'm not the Deku I once were and you know it, Izuku said calmly. He had made peace with that. He was more than what people thought of him. But he still wanted to show that to Katsuki. Call it petty, call it egotistical, he didn't care. He wanted to make sure he would never hear Katsuki say less of him again. Katsuki, on the other hand, was pissed. Deku hadn't had any training, had he? It was ridiculous. The bastard hadn't even had a quirk for a year and still thought he was better. I don't fucking care, damn it. That was true. It didn't matter if Deku had a quirk or not. Katsuki would still prove he was better. He would be number one. He wouldn't let someone with a villainous quirk like Deku's be better than someone with a quirk so perfect as his. He could just, well, that was an idea. So, you think you can beat me, huh, Deku? Katsuki couldn't hold the grin that appeared in his face. So beat this. The gauntlet's safety lockers took some seconds from Katsuki and made Izuku able to dodge the explosion that followed it. The word explosion didn't seem to be able to explain everything that happened. The wall was completely destroyed, and the building trembled as if it was going to collapse. The heat wave that hit Izuku's body burned his back. Bad. Izuku couldn't breathe as the pain tingled through his body. Not only that, but the hot air he inhaled was suffocating. Young Bakugo, a voice in the communicator's All Might's voice, called. If you shoot another blast like that, I'll end this exercise forcibly and you will lose. Toshinori's heart was a mess, beating frantically as he saw Midoriya walking a bit stiff. He should stop it, but, fuck it. Katsuki growled as he ran towards Izuku's direction. Let's do this the old-fashioned way, Deku. Izuku was freaking out. He could barely move, but if he could only turn. He moved enough for Katsuki to grab him by the collar and punch him in the guts. Izuku could feel his stomach twisting and Katsuki let him loose when he realized Izuku was going to throw up. The green-haired boy had never realized he could feel so many things in such a small time. He was pretty sure the only thing keeping him awake was the adrenaline rushing through his veins. Izuku was now being supported by his 2 hands and feet while he shrinked, curling up a bit, feeling the horrendous taste of gastric acid and his partially digested lunch in his tongue. He had puke all around him and was almost collapsing on top of it. Young Bakugo, young Midoriya, I'm stopping this. No, Izuku was able to say. I want to continue. That sounds better. It was now or never. Katsuki moved, getting ready to kick Izuku's stomach. Izuku was able to slide to the side, which made Katsuki lose his balance. Midoriya took the opportunity to kick Katsuki's support leg right at the back of his knee, making the boy fall, confused. People shouldn't underestimate an opponent, even if they thought they were going to win. Especially in those situations. Izuku had already reached the handcuff at his pocket and put it around Katsuki's wrists. The gloves and the gauntlet blocked the vision, so when All Might finally announced the hero team's victory, Katsuki was getting back to his feet and was definitely pissed. Young Bakugo, back off of young Midoriya. The blonde didn't care about it, and he was definitely going to throw another punch. But Deku had already fainted from exhaustion. When Izuku was going to school the next day, he couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. He had blacked out. It wasn't all bad since he had actually spoken to All Might. Or at least All Might had spoken to him, given that Izuku was too stunned to articulate coherent words. He had considered going after Katsuki after he woken up. But after further thought, he just realized it wasn't worth it. What was he even going to tell him? Izuku stopped when he noticed the crowd that had formed right in front of the UA gates. What the hell? Excuse me, can you tell us what is it like to have All Might as a teacher? A woman asked him. I am sorry, I need to go to the infirmary, was all he said while trying to avoid eye contact with the lady. Izuku thought Recovery Girl was scary. She had been so pissed at him when he'd woken up, saying Izuku should have stopped the fight before he got severely burned, broken some ribs and fainted from all of that. But Izuku was glad he didn't. It felt good to win, especially against Katsuki. It had been something similar to that time he stole his quirk, a weird feeling of pride. It felt good to win something over somebody that had always used him to feel like he was superior. He knew that if he told that to Hound Dog he would tell him that it wasn't very hero-like, but honestly, he wasn't worried about that. He could work on that once he enjoyed this feeling just this time, right? Tamura Shigaraki was standing in front of the gates that had been sealed with layers and layers of steel. That was such a poor security system. Truly laughable. Wednesday morning passed like a hurricane. There had been the class president voting, in which, by a miracle, Izuku had won. Then, during lunch there had been a break-in. That ended up being just the press. In the end, Ida had become the official class president, and they were all going to do some rescue training at this place called the USJ for their foundational skill of heroics class. The bus ride had been uncomfortable to say the least. There were a few of his classmates that were making fun of Katsuki for his aggressive behavior the day before. It was not one of the best ideas. The USJ was huge. There were several areas that simulated accidents or disasters ready for the students to use them. Everything was beautiful. And, as if things couldn't get more exciting, the Pro Hero 13 was there. Their quirk was so cool. Black Hole was perfect for rescue situations. Welcome, class. Before we start, I'd like to talk with you about your quirks. The silence that embraced the space was deafening. As 13 explained the responsibility that came from being a hero, Izuku pondered. Was his quirk dangerous? He wasn't sure about the word. Yes, it could be unpleasant for most of the people, but it couldn't harm anyone. Unless he stealed some dangerous quirk. But it wasn't like he wanted or planned on doing that. Suddenly 13's speech was interrupted by a purple mist that started growing inside the USJ. A horrendous figure with a thin body and hands all around it appeared. Izuku didn't need to see his face to know how terrible it could be. The hand that blocked its view said enough. He was followed by a person. Or at least what seemed to be a person. But the only thing they could see was more of that purple mist. But the worst part was when the other villains started appearing. There were 10, 20, 30. There were about 70 different villains, all looking incredibly murderous. Kill the symbol of peace, the man said with a hoarse voice. Izuku watched as Aizawa started walking towards the villains. Sensei, are you going to fight alone? He didn't bother hiding the concern in his voice. Eraserhead fighting style is vanishing with the enemy's quirks and then capturing them. A direct fight isn't. No hero has only one card up his sleeve, the pro said. 13, I'll leave them here with you. Midoriya watched as Aizawa raced and captured villains left and right. His movements were fast, incredibly fast for someone that was literally moving other people around. It was simply amazing. It meant Eraserhead's specialty had almost nothing to do with his quirk, and more to do with his own physical abilities. The invasion sensors. They're obviously on, but, Yaoyorozu said. We don't know if the entire school was invaded or not, Todoroki said. But if they didn't detect anything, then it means that it's somebody else's quirk, something that can cut communications. No one said anything back. This is a confined space, Todoroki continued, and yet they appeared exactly when there were a small group of people. They may be crazy, but they're not stupid. This attack was really well planned, and they definitely have a goal set. It's not the time to analyze. Let's go, Ida called. He was right. They needed to get out as soon as possible. All Might would be here any minute now, right? Izuku saw the mist guy basically teleport to where they were, blocking the path to the door. I'm sorry to interrupt you. Ladies and gentlemen, we are the League of Villains. It's a pleasure meeting you all, and we would like to apologize, but we took the liberty to get in this hero nest called UA, so that All Might, the symbol of peace, makes his last trip. What? The fact that that villain had said those things in such a polite way made Izuku's stomach flip. Accordingly, with the information we had, we supposed All Might would be here. Was there some mishap? Indeed, All Might was their heroics teacher. Izuku just assumed he would come in later, making a huge entrance that would cheer everybody up. But he hadn't, and he didn't seem to know that they were under attack since he hadn't shown up yet. Katsuki and Kirishima started running towards the villain. Izuku wanted to scream for them not to be stupid, but he wasn't able to, since the boys had vanished in thin air. Before he could figure what the hell was going on, Izuku felt the ground disappear and he started falling through the sky. Was that a teleportation quirk? Izuku started panicking as he saw the water getting closer. He breathed deeply before feeling his body immersing. The only problem about that was, the higher the fall, the deeper he'd sink. He must have been about 4 meters down. He could feel the small pressure the water did around him. He needed to get up. He needed to help the others. Izuku knew how to swim, but it was exponentially more difficult when a shark-like person came fast as lightning towards your direction. Izuku felt the panic take over his body, and he screamed when he felt something, or someone, grabbing him by the waist. Asui dropped him at the boat, right at the middle of the artificial lake. She retracted her tongue as she dropped Minda at their sides. Is everything okay, Kiro? Izuku shook his head, feeling a bit dizzy from everything that had happened. Yes, thank you, Asui. Call me Tsuyu, okay. The situation doesn't seem favorable. Izuku didn't bother answering as he turned to look outside of the boat. There were several villains down in the water. What are we going to do? Minda cried as Izuku thought. That purple mist guy must have sent the villains that fitted the best to water fights where they were, which meant they had a good idea of the USJ map. They also knew the exact schedule, since they attacked right before the class started. Did that mean they also knew about the students' quirks? No, it didn't seem like that was the case. If they knew, they'd have probably sent Asui to a fire area or even an ice one. They knew about our classes. It means that it's very possible that the press attack was orchestrated by them so they could get some intel, Izuku pondered. Todoroki was right. They prepared this attack carefully. But, it's impossible to kill All Might, Minda cried. When you think about it, it may look impossible. But All Might is a human, even though sometimes people tended to forget that. Minda, Asui called. They are doing this madness because they have a plan, don't you think? Izuku tried to ignore Minda's cries as he looked around. He needed a plan. Those villains wouldn't wait for long. Yes, they must have some way to kill the #1 hero. But why? Was there a reason? Something to do with the crime rates that dropped violently ever since All Might debuted as a hero? No, it wasn't time to think about that. If they have a plan to kill All Might, then Midoriya gulped. Then we need to fight back. You can't even beat a child, Shoto growled as he froze every villain present at the landslide zone. Good luck there. You're grown-ups, right? Momo Yaoyorozu was making herself a bat and making Gyro a long knife. She felt her heart sink at the thought of fighting these guys. They had no proper training. They couldn't do it. Kaminari was looking terrified too. If she needed to point out the most courageous person in that group, it'd be Gyro. She gulped as the villain's eyes glowed in rage. They were screwed. Katsuki was angry, pissed. Who the fuck did those villains thought they were? They really said they were going to kill All Might, the #1 fucking hero. It was outrageous, ridiculous, stupid. He felt his arms and hands shake a little bit while a sinking feeling hit his stomach. It was anger, right? Such anger that it made him tremble, buzzing like he had been hit by some sort of electrical shock. Hell, he wanted to beat those fuckers to the ground. The red-haired boy, Kirishima, if he remembered correctly, was there with him. He used his quirk to knock those villains out. Katsuki couldn't let shitty hair do more than he did. The boy bursted, tossing explosions left and right, hitting as many villains as he could. He wouldn't lose. He couldn't. Toshinori was going to go to the USJ. He needed to rest a bit before he could do that, unfortunately. He was sure that the only reason he could still transform into his muscular form was one for all still pulsing through his veins. His body was tired. He was tired. He didn't want to admit it, but he was getting older. His body had been through too much. He was breathing with difficulty when Principal Nedzu entered the door. Principal, Toshinori was fast to bow a little, respectfully. Your fur looks splendid today. The secret is keratin. Humans could never get such shine. The childish smile stamped across his face was not reassuring at all. Putting that aside, I think we need to talk about some things, Toshinori. The hero wasn't sure how to respond. He just sat, hopelessly, at the sofa, waiting for the rat-dog-bear-like creature to sit in front of him. He was holding a tablet and didn't seem mad, but Toshinori was not going to place his bet on that. Nedzu could be worse than any villain, Yagi had heard. Firstly, I saw the news regarding your heroic deeds. Toshinori was waiting for this. I understand that you've always reacted instinctively, not letting any case that comes to your ears go, right. It was to help you that I recommended you becoming a teacher here at UA. But you still refuse to slow down at your hero work, even though this is the opportunity you have to help new heroes to grow. Toshinori couldn't look at Nedzu. He felt embarrassed. I may have been the one to call you, but you did accept the position. That being said, as the principal, I must say that I'd prefer for you to give your teaching priority. This city has several hero agencies, after all. You're completely right, sir. That's why I was planning on going to the USJ right away, and we are not done with it yet. The principal interrupted him. Toshinori gulped, finally having the guts to look Nedzu in the eye. I understand your reluctance on passing one for all to somebody else, especially when you don't really know them. Oh, that. Toshinori wasn't sure what to do. He had a connection with young Midoriya. He liked the kid. He would undoubtedly give him one for all. If it wasn't for his quirk, Tagata is a very good choice. He has your enthusiasm and is also one of our best students. Besides, his body is strong enough, and since he's already mastered his own quirk, it wouldn't be too hard to adapt to a new one. Principal Nedzu. Yagi already knew what he would answer. Would it be possible to give my quirk to, young Midoriya? He saw Nedzu's smile soften. You've grown fond of the boy, he asked while sipping his tea. Well, I've known him for almost a year now, and I know that he has a heroic heart. Toshinori remembered the times the kid had helped him. It could have been only going up some stairs, helping him carry some grocery bags, but he had always made sure he would be good, happy, of course, just like Toshinori. He would have bad days, but he was a human, and a teenager that had passed through a lot. It wouldn't be fair to wish he would every day be a smiling ray of sunshine. Yagi knew for a fact that it was impossible. If he hadn't had that quirk, he would be my successor. I see. The uncomfortable silence was broken by the sound of the teacup hitting its saucer. Unfortunately, I must say it's not safe to entrust him with such power. Toshinori felt something in his heart break. Why was he so sad about it? It was the best option, after all. Nedzu's high specs wouldn't fail them. At least not until we make sure he has no connection to All for One, he complimented. But, being completely logical, the chances are infimum. Toshinori nodded. Not to mention that Tagata is interning with Sir Night-Eye, who has personally said to me that he thinks it'd be the best option for you. Toshinori felt his body shiver after hearing the name. He hadn't spoken to Sir in years since that. So, you think I should give one for all to young Tagata? He asked, feeling his throat dry. Yes, I do. Fight. Are you mad? Mainta's annoying voice cried. Izuku asked about their quirks and listened to the explanations. When both of them finished, he started explaining his own. and it was useless. They're not underestimating us, he stated as he saw the villains waiting in the water. I'm done. Let's finish this, one of the villains said. He had a bluish face, with gills under his shark-like eyes. He sent a giant wave of water that tore the ship in two. It was going to sink. Fast. Izuku heard Mineta screaming something about death, high school, and, well, he was definitely disgusting. He explained the plan for his classmates as quickly as possible. I'm gonna copy Kacchan for a moment, Midoriya said as he jumped from the edge. He had a plan. It was a stupid, reckless, and probably deadly one, but he needed to try. Die, he screamed while jumping towards the villain that had created the wave. It was a water manipulation quirk, right? Something like that. It couldn't be that hard to get the hang of it. He was able to touch the villain's head. He was really stupid, wasn't he? He didn't even know he'd be able to steal his quirk, but he felt it. He could feel the quirk, and he felt the moment the transfer occurred. It was fast, which made the villain faint. He wasn't sure if he would be able to breathe now, but he still had the mutant looks, which could mean that his quirk had nothing to do with the mutations, or that Izuku wasn't able to steal mutant characteristics. He hoped for it to be the first. Izuku tried controlling the water. He just wanted to get as far as possible from all those people that wanted to kill him. The quirk reacted. A current took him away from the villains. Okay, cool. He was starting to get it. Mineta, now. He screamed and saw the purple balls being tossed at the water. Izuku was shaking from concentration. He had to focus on not drowning while controlling a new quirk, but his body acted like it had always prepared itself for that without Izuku even knowing. He was able to make a swirl that pulled all the villains towards the center while he was kept safe at a distance. The balls would keep those guys immobilized for a while. Hopefully Izuku would be able to give that guy's quirk back, even though he was a villain that tried to kill teenagers. Tsuyu. He called and felt her tongue grabbing him by the waist while she jumped towards the shore. They had beaten those guys, sure, but it only made Izuku worry more. He saw how many villains Aizawa was fighting against. Those guys were just the beginning. Disperse to kill. Shoto sighed. I'm sorry, but to me you are only people with lots of spare time. This brat did all of that the moment he was tossed here. Some frozen villain asked, Are you kidding me? This shit hurts. Shoto couldn't understand it. In the beginning he thought they were planning on killing All Might with numbers since there were many villains out there, but he wasn't so sure anymore. They were as good as nothing. They were a bunch of nobodies. From what he'd saw, there were only 4 or 5 that actually were a threat. If you keep stuck like that, your body will start to rot on account of the cold, freezing little by little, the kid said while getting near one of the thugs. Despite all of this, I still want to be a hero. If it was possible, I'd like to avoid this sort of cruelty. He could see the terrified look at those people's faces. What's the plan to kill All Might, after all? Shit, Kaminari exclaimed after almost getting hit by a villain. Is everybody crazy? What the hell is going on here? What about focusing on getting away first? Gyro said, Aren't you the one with the electrical quirk? Why don't you tase those guys? Momo couldn't think straight. She was terrified. What were they supposed to do? They were too many. Yaoyorozu, can you make an insulating blanket? Gyro said, the rush in her voice clear as water. Sure, I'll need a minute. She was actually worried, but she could help Gyro, right? She must know what she was doing. Shoto was tired. His eyes stung, his body was sweaty and his muscles sore. The adrenaline that rushed through him had stopped helping a long time ago and only made him tremulous and deviated his focus. He wasn't good with long fights. Because you're moving, it's harder to see, but there are times when your hair falls. The villain with those weird hands clinging on his body said with a hoarse voice. It happens when you finish a move sequence, and the gap between these is getting shorter each time. Aizawa threw his capture weapon towards the villain, who grabbed the end. Shota impulsed his body towards the boy's direction, beating his stomach with his elbow. Careful not to go beyond your limits, Eraserhead. As Shota blinked, he felt a sharp pain at his elbows. It was disintegrating. He got away as soon as possible. His elbow had been shattered. Someone came behind his back, and Shota almost wasn't able to dodge before a long knife cut the air at the place he had been the moment before. A new guy came by his right side, the side that was hurt. He grabbed his scarf and tossed it towards the guy using his left hand and then used the momentum to toss him away. He breathed heavily and hardly, the pain numbing his other senses. This quirk of yours, it's not very good for long fights, is it? Shota huffed. This may be a bit different from what you're used to, right? I believe your specialty is stealth, having the element of surprise to help. Shota tried getting closer. So then, why did you decide to attack? The villain continued. Shota wanted to punch this brat in the face so bad. Was it to make your students less worried? Inspiring. Beautiful. Fantastic, actually. But, my dear hero, something in the maleficent laugh that left his body made Shota shake a bit more. Your true enemy isn't me. An enormous creature appeared behind the villain. It had a bird's beak, sharp teeth, and its brain was exposed. Its scream was horrendous, fitting the thing's general appearance. What the fuck was that? Izuku couldn't look away. Everything was awful. He could see Asui and Minta were also looking at the fight, too mesmerized to react. That was real life. Real heroes. That was what they'd have to face once they got older and graduated. But nobody would have ever thought about that. Not when the crime rates were so low. Not when they had the symbol of peace making sure they knew they were safe for all their childhoods. They never considered that as a possibility. The weird creature was holding Aizawa. Arms shouldn't be turned like that. It was sickening to see. Meet the mutant created to eliminate the symbol of peace. Meet him, Nomu. Ada started running as fast as he could. He had barely escaped and he needed to get help as soon as possible. Mr. Aizawa wasn't going to be able to handle that on his own. Is it over? Bunch of weak extras, Katsuki said. He was sweaty and there was smoke sticking to his body. Kirishima had a frown while he examined the villains down on the ground. Okay, let's save the others now, the red-haired said. If we're still at the USJ, it means the others are also. I'm worried about the ones that don't have attack quirks. He turned to look at Katsuki. We were reckless and ended up here. We should take responsibility for our actions. That's the manly. If you want to go by yourself, Katsuki growled. I'm going to kill that warp bastard. What? The extra's voice was high and out of tune. Stop acting like a child. First of all, our attacks don't work against. Fuck you. Katsuki was tired of that. He was not in the mood to talk to that idiot. He is our enemy's escape route. We need to destroy it because without it those shitheads can't escape. Besides, we can do something to that missed fuck. He was interrupted by a villain that was holding a knife. Katsuki grabbed him by the head and blew him up enough for him to faint. How the fuck did Bakugo saw that? Kirishima thought. The guy was literally invisible. If they're all a bunch of shit like these guys, then the others shouldn't be having any trouble. Katsuki saw Kirishima grin. I liked your attitude, Bakugo. Trusting your friends. Very manly. I'm on it. Let's fight those villains. The quirk that allows you to erase other quirks is truly amazing. The hand guy kept talking. But it means nothing against pure physical bestial strength. Midoriya, are you serious about going there? He heard Minta whisper. He was going to answer, but a purple mist appeared right by the villain's side. Tamura Shigaraki. The deep voice of the mist man called the hand man. Chirajiri, did you take care of 13? Shigaraki asked. I was able to put them out of the fight, but a few students ended up being scattered, and one of them managed to escape my claws. Izuku felt a rush of hope wash his body. One escaped. They could bring help. Huh? Shigaraki asked, bringing his hand to his neck. He started grunting while he scratched his neck vigorously. Kurajiri, if you weren't our warp gate I would be crushing you right here and now. He kept scratching his neck, blood starting to reach his skin's surface. We can't fight dozens of pro heroes. Game over. It's game over for us. For now, he stopped itching his neck abruptly. Let's go away, then. Going away. Was that right? We are going to escape. Minta cheered. Something's wrong, Midoriya, Asui said, holding Minta's head underwater. Yeah, I can't believe they're actually going to leave. Not after all of this. They wanted to kill All Might. If they retreated now, it would only make it harder. You and the police would be a lot safer when they tried it again. But, before that, Shigaraki started talking again. It'd be interesting to shake the symbol of peace's pride. Shigaraki was faster than Izuku thought. He couldn't understand what the hell the villain was going to do, until he was 2 meters away from Tsuyu. Izuku's eyes widened in fear. The moment Shigaraki's left hand reached her face, Izuku noticed Aizawa glancing at him. He needed to do something before his teacher blinked. His feet moved as fast as lightning. He needed to take his quirk. He couldn't risk him hurting anybody. He had seen what he'd done with Aizawa's elbow. He didn't even want to think what it could do to Tsuyu's face. If he was fast enough he could even make him faint. The moment Izuku's hands touched skin, he felt the energy rushing through his body as something new appeared. The only problem was, it wasn't Shigaraki, and it wasn't passed out. What the hell had happened? Izuku wasn't sure, but the Nomu had hit him on the stomach, thrown him at least 20 meters back and he had hit the ground with his head. But he was still okay. He wasn't in any sort of pain, and his body felt like it always did. To be honest, he, if hadn't seen it happen, would have never believed that he had been hit with a strength compared to All Might's right in his ribs. That had been broken not too long ago. He heard the laugh coming out of Shigaraki's body. That man was crazy. Izuku saw the villain's body language change from amused to confused. Neither had any idea what had happened. Interesting. Shigaraki's words were interrupted by a loud bang. Izuku looked towards the sound. Feeling happy, tears rushed to his eyes. Have no fear, for I have come. All Might called out. Guess we'll have to keep playing. Then, was the answer Shigaraki gave to the sight of the symbol of peace. Izuku was feeling his mind rush, but he couldn't do anything but shiver. All Might wasn't smiling. In fact, his face was contorted into an angry expression. I was waiting for you, hero. Society dung. As lightning, All Might defeated the minor villains that Aizawa weren't able to. Take him somewhere safe, All Might said for Izuku, Minta and Asui. Izuku didn't want it to do it. Shigaraki was dangerous. If he could steal his quirk. But that Nomu thing wouldn't let him. He wasn't sure about the reason the creature didn't pass out. It was supposed to happen. It had happened to everybody when Izuku wasn't careful. Well, it didn't really seem to be normal. That was the weapon. That was what was meant to kill All Might. And then, he felt something. He stole something. But what was that? The beast was very strong, but it didn't look like it was from a quirk. That punch could have killed Izuku. Something rushed through his mind. That was it, he had lost his mind. Mr. Tsukauchi and Mr. Shimura would kill him themselves if Izuku was able to escape what he was planning to do. But All Might not be able to do this on his own. Keep going, I need to do something. He told his classmates and started running back to the fight, ignoring the protest at their voices. He closed his eyes, waiting for the pain as he ran towards the enormous creature. Izuku heard All Might's voice calling for him with a "My boy, don't." It didn't stop him, and when he felt his body being tossed away, he didn't feel any pain. He landed on the ground, a little clumsy. But even though he felt a little dizzy from the rapid movement, he wasn't hurt. Was that some kind of pain resistance? If it were, he should have at least one broken bone. But he didn't. No, it was something else. Something more like shock absorption. What? Shigaraki said while Izuku smiled, looking at his hands. That's his quirk, right? Izuku asked, feeling glee rushing through his body. That would be interesting. How do you? Shigaraki started itching his neck again. That guy needed serious help. Oh, the villain stopped the scratches while looking at the kid. If Izuku could see his face, it would have been a lot easier to understand what he was doing. Kurogiri, retreat. Not now, you fuckface. Kacchan's voice screamed while he directed some explosions towards the missed guy. All Might took the gap to punch the Nomu in the stomach. Its screams filled the area. Horribly painful. Without his shock absorption. Let's end this, All Might said while he punched and then got ready to toss the Nomu on the ground. Suddenly a gate opened right beneath his feet. Another one had opened right at their side. Toshinori saw his body being trapped by a lethal warp gate. He needed to get out of it before the villain closed it, or else he needed to be alive. He wasn't finished with his responsibilities yet, but that bastard was poking at his injury, and it hurt like hell. All Might, Izuku started running towards him. He couldn't steal the warp gate now. If he did it, it could close. But he didn't even look like it had a body. Piss off, Deku, Katsuki said, projecting himself up front with his explosions. But instead of going towards All Might, he went to the Kurogiri guy. Try to close that damn gate and your face is gone. Only now Izuku saw what Katsuki was doing. He was holding the missed guy that apparently did have a body. It was now time for Todoroki, whom Izuku hadn't realized had gotten there, to freeze the Namu's right arm and leg. Toshinori used all the strength he had in his body to get out of the hole. That creature couldn't move now. It was everything he could do to avoid dying. But the creature wasn't immobilized for long. Actually, the members that had been frozen and actually fallen off his body started to grow again. Everybody go away. Now, Toshinori used every single bit of authority he had in his voice to make the kids listen to him. Wasn't his quirk shock absorption? No one said it was the only one. Izuku felt something weird. How did that beast had more than one quirk? Like, he knew it wasn't impossible, his own quirk being the living proof, but still. How did somebody had some sort of quirk that allowed this to happen? Just like his. What the hell was he thinking? It was impossible. It must be something similar, like what? Izuku shook his head. He didn't want it to think about it. Not now. He started walking away, slowly, a bit confused. The Namu started rushing towards Katsuki. In less than a second, the blonde was already by his side, a weird look in his face, and All Might was fighting the beast again. Kirishima, Todoroki, Katsuki, and Izuku were now watching the brutal confrontation. All Might would win. He always did. Izuku wasn't even able to see the punches. Everything was too fast. The only thing that told him All Might was actually doing something were the agonizing screams the beast let out. In a finishing blow, All Might threw the Namu out of the USJ, opening a hole at the ceiling. It looks like this came right out of an American comic book, Kirishima said with a shocked look at his face. Katsuki froze at the idea of that being the power of the #1 hero. So brutal. Toshinori, on the other hand, felt no strength emanating from his body. If he was still at his golden age, if he wasn't so weak, it would have only taken 8 punches. 8. It could have been worse. If he had forced himself, it would have probably taken more than 300, but still, he was getting weaker by the day. Netsu was right. He needed a successor as soon as possible. And now he was sure it couldn't be young Midoriya. Not after that monster. Very well, villain, it's time to end this, he growled to Shigaraki. You fucking cheater. The man started again to scratch his neck. Look what you did with my Namu. Cheater, cheater, cheater. Toshinori observed as the boy mumbled something about lies. Did he lie to me? That couldn't be good. Shigaraki, calm down. We need to retreat now, Kurogiri said while appearing right at the villain's side. Other heroes are almost here. Shigaraki glanced at Toshinori and then to somewhere else. All Might turned slightly to see who it was. His heart sank. Midoriya had widened eyes. Yagi saw the boy gulp when Shigaraki kept looking at him while retreating towards the purple mist. Toshinori had to grab them before they left. It was his job. But his body wouldn't do it. He was too shocked. He couldn't even speak. And then, as if it had never been there, Shigaraki and Kurogiri were gone. There were villains passed out on the floor and 2 hurt pro-heroes, not to mention all the students that hadn't been able to get there. The door opened again, revealing heroes ready to fight. Several of them, all the UA teachers, had come to their rescue, only to be met by the sight of the number 1 hero frozen in the middle of the battleground. Shigaraki was pissed, he could see. The way he talked about how the symbol of peace wasn't weaker. But All for One knew he was wrong. I lost the Nomu, the fight. Those villains were eliminated too quickly. Those kids' levels are higher than I expected. Yes, I see we may have underestimated their powers, he admitted with a bitter taste in his mouth. The Nomu was a conjoint work of mine and the professor. After all the hard work to make him able to fight All Might. Well, we'll just deal with it later. Power. Yes, Shigaraki started talking again. There was this really peculiar kid there. It may pique your interest. All for One listened to his pupil talking about the kid with hatred in his voice. He was sure that, if he had any hair on his body, they would have stood up. Izuku couldn't stop cracking his knuckles, or at least trying to since it had already been a few minutes. The heroes went to the other zones to help rescue the other students. A few of them had already returned, but Izuku couldn't stop feeling this weird twist in his stomach. Did that have something to do with that villain staring at him? He shook his head. Stop thinking about it. You're probably like that because you stole 2 quirks. Would he be able to give them back? It felt wrong to keep them. Hey, Midoriya, are you okay? Hound Dog's voice reached him and Izuku tried looking as calm as possible, and failed miserably. Why yeah, why wouldn't it be? Like, I know we've been attacked by this bunch of villains and all, but I'm fine. Just fine. Hound Dog showed him a skeptical expression, but decided not to push him. You should get out. Now, the hero continued. The police are out there and Detective Tsukauchi was looking for you. As sure. Izuku cursed mentally at puberty for making his voice sound like a dying goose. But he just kept walking as fast as possible towards the exit. He had no idea Mr. Tsukauchi's name would make him so happy. Kid. Tsukauchi sounded utterly relieved. Thank God you're okay. You should thank All Might for that, actually. Izuku replied while Tsukauchi gave him a tight hug. The boy enjoyed the affection for a moment, before looking at the man's eyes. Mr. Tsukauchi, could I speak with you somewhere else? More quieter. Tsukauchi looked concerned, showing a frown. And with Mr. Shimura too, if possible. Izuku needed to speak with him. When he met Mr. Shimura, they had told him he was some sort of a quirk analyst. That was exactly what Izuku needed. He needed to ask the possibilities, because he had this weird feeling growing in his chest. Izuku got home to his mother in tears. The moment Detective Tsukauchi left him there, Izuku was wrapped in a hug. I was so worried, baby. He felt his mother's warm tears soak his shirt. Izuku couldn't help but hug her too. He hadn't realized how much it would have meant to her if he got hurt. I'm fine, Mom. I didn't even got hurt, he said, patting her back. Tomorrow I'll come by to talk with you, okay, kid? I'll bring Mr. Shimura. Thank you, Mr. Tsukauchi, Izuku answered, wiping his own tears that were almost being shed. Boy, we have known each other for a year now. You don't have to call me Mr. every time you know. Tsukauchi left the apartment and called Toshinori once he was sure no one could hear them. They had to talk to Nedzu now. Mom, what was Dad like? Izuku asked, avoiding looking at her face. He had never asked about him, mostly because she had never spoken a lot about the matter. He could remember times she'd say his father would be proud of him, but it was never more than that. It was almost like a person with no face, someone that existed but at the same time didn't. Where did that come from, Izuku? Inko's voice was sweet, worried, almost. Izuku wasn't sure. It was a gut feeling he couldn't understand. Izuku tried to toss the memory away. That's probably why his dad never came home. Kacchan's words echoed in his head. He had tried to forget that, but how do one forget such painful words? You never talk about him. And I was curious. And did he leave me because I was quirkless? Inko's heart broke as she heard her son speak such dreadful things. I feel bad. I was the reason he left you, weren't I? Is that why you never talk about him with me? Izuku, no. She almost screamed as she grabbed his hand. Was that how her son felt for all those years? Of course not. Izuku were crying hard. It wasn't just that. It was the things that had happened today. The fears, the fear of being a burden. He wasn't strong enough. He didn't want it to worry his mom, but he couldn't take it anymore. I thought you didn't wanted to know, Inko said, feeling her own tears running down her cheeks. I assumed you wouldn't feel comfortable. I know how it was hard for you, growing up with your father away. I actually assumed you had some sort of heartache regarding your father. It's a bit hard to feel anything towards someone you know nothing about, Izuku whispered, but Inko heard. I'm sorry I made you think that. But, no, your father didn't leave me because of you. In fact, he didn't leave me at all. Izuku's sadness eased a little when he heard that. He was a bit confused, though. What do you mean? Your dad actually still sends us money. And every July, he sends a bit more for me to be able to buy you something cool for your birthday. And for Christmas too. Izuku couldn't think coherently. What? I actually haven't talked to him in a few years, his mother admitted with a sad look. But I know that he still loves you very much. He cares for me. Izuku didn't hold back the tears that fell from his eyes. Yes, baby, his mom caressed his cheeks while both of them cried silently. I know he does. I don't know where he is now, but it's a gut feeling. Asashi, he cared for his family very much. Izuku heard as his mother told more and more stories. How they met, they falling in love. Their wedding, she even showed Izuku a picture of them, even though his face was covered because of them kissing. He, just like you, was really into quirk analysis. Books and books of his own theories, she said. By this time Izuku was already smiling. Somehow it put his heart at ease. His father cared for him. That was enough. He just wished, someday, they would be able to meet. But something deep down bothered him. Something he wasn't quite sure yet. Izuku was shaking when the men entered the room. He had so much to ask, but, at the same time, the questions weren't clear. Hey kid, Tsukauchi greeted him. Izuku sat with them in the living room. A weird mood took over the place as the boy tried figuring out how to start. So, about the quirks you stole, Tsukauchi started talking, which actually made Izuku quite glad. There was this villain that asked for his back. Oh, sure, we can give it to him right away. Sir. Izuku felt so dumb for not doing it yesterday when the villains were being taken out of UA. No need to worry, we're not mad at you. We can go there after this. It's not like he's going to need it anytime soon. Tsukauchi almost laughed after saying that. And what about the other ones? Izuku asked. The one that belonged to the Nomu. The looks the men exchanged weren't reassuring. About that, Tsukauchi started. You can keep it, Mr. Shimura said. For now. Izuku looked like somebody had punched him in the guts. Really? He didn't want it to look too excited. He had stolen it, after all. The police actually think it is the best, Tsukauchi said. He is strong and already has a regeneration quirk. If he had another that gave him shock absorption, it would be dangerous. But they entrusted me with keeping it. Izuku wasn't sure if he felt pride or fear. Well, it was the logical choice. Tsukauchi couldn't say that it was because the kid had people watching him 24/7. But he was most definitely not proud of it. He trusted the kid. He really did. And it felt wrong to lie to someone that trusted him so much. About that Nomu thing. Izuku started speaking. I couldn't stop thinking about it. But how did it add 2 quirks? This was what Netsu had advised them to avoid. But Toshinori already seemed to have an answer. There are other people with 2 quirks, boy. Take Todoroki as an example. Even though the words were calm, Naomasa could see the stiffness in his friend's body. Yes, but even though he has 2 quirks, it was different. Midoriya stuttered a bit while staring at his hands. What do you mean? When I stole Todoroki's quirk, it was one thing. Like, there were 2 sides of it. But I stole it together. Izuku hoped it was making sense, but the men's faces were blank. But when I stole that Nomu's quirk, only one came. They were silent for a long time. My Midoriya, Mr. Shimura called. Quirks are unpredictable. Yes, they were. Izuku knew about it a lot from searching on the internet. Quirks' origins are unsure. We don't know the limitations. And there are theories about the future, right? How quirks get too powerful. Izuku nodded, agreeing. So a creature having 2 quirks. It is possible. He knew it. He knew it could be just anything. But, I beg you to not think about it too much. Toshinori was worried. He couldn't deny it. But, he didn't thought it would be like this. He wasn't afraid of the kid turning evil. No, far from that. He was afraid the kid would get hurt. If his and Naomasa's theories of the kid and All for One being connected were proven to be true, the boy would be devastated. He had lived with the kid for a while. It was something so obvious now that Toshinori felt almost bad for doubting the kid when they first met. Focus on your classes. Let the pro heroes deal with this. Okay, Izuku was going to complain, but wasn't he right? He was just a 15-year-old boy with zero knowledge of this that didn't came out of the internet. Mr. Shimura, on the other hand, worked with it, and he trusted him. Oh okay, great. If you want to give the quirk back now, we can go get ice cream after, Naomasa said, wanting to change the subject for good. Hound Dog would have a lot of work to do. How's that fair? Katsuki raged. Bakugo, must I ask you to be silent and not interrupt me once again? Aizawa's face was covered in bandages and they couldn't see his actual expression. But Izuku assumed it was a tired one. How in hell did they allow Deku to keep a stolen quirk? Katsuki was furious. It wasn't fair. Why did the nerd get to keep it? It should go against some law, for fuck's sake. Kacchan, just calm down, please. You shut the fuck up. You don't get to talk here, Katsuki growled without glancing at the nerd. What the hell would they allow next? He's stealing people's quirks and keeping them. What the hell would happen when Deku got a license? Then what? It was ridiculous, stupid, not hero-like. Bakugo, watch out for how you talk to your classmates. Oh, really? And more than that, watch out how you talk to your teacher. Aizawa's hair got up and Katsuki sat loudly in his chair. The decision has been made, and if you don't support it, you can very well get out of this school. A big part of being a hero is obeying the ones that are in charge of it. If you can't accept it, then I'm afraid this isn't the best option for you. No one said a word. Now that everybody's settled down, the teacher continued. We need to talk about the UA Sports Festival. Kashinori watched as a blonde boy walked inside the room. Nedzu had reserved them the place so he could meet the possible future holder of One for All. It's an honor meeting you, All Might. He saw young Tagada bowing a bit before offering his hand. Sir speaks very highly of you. Sir Night-Eye. Toshinori hid the discomfort by grabbing Tagada's hand. Asashi Midoriya. A name he hadn't thought of in a long time. A family he hadn't seen in a time even longer. Midoriya, Inko and Izuku. That wasn't how All for One planned on meeting them again. Not in a million years. The professor had made sure Izuku's quirk wouldn't manifest. Didn't he? So how in the history of hell did a green-haired freckled boy had a quirk that allowed him to steal other people's quirks? He cursed himself. He had tried stealing his son's quirk as soon as it manifested when he was 2. It didn't work. Apparently, the quirk had some sort of protection. When someone tried to steal it, it automatically started to steal the quirk that was doing it. It couldn't be stealed. Just like his brothers, All for One couldn't steal his sons. It pissed him. This was a cursed bloodline. Indeed, it is the US Sports Festival, everybody. Present Mike's screechy voice echoed through the room. The speakers weren't loud, but the silence made it seem almost deafening. Izuku was a bit anxious, to say the least. Tsukauchi and Mr. Shimura had told him he didn't need to worry about winning. But he wanted to. He wanted to win, show everybody he was good enough. But how was he going to do that? He was going to compete against the entire school. He had only shock absorption, and, if he was completely honest, it provided him only a good defense. In the end, he had no attack moves. And it was not going to be any good if he couldn't attack if. No, when he got to the individual fights. I hope my brother will be able to see it, Ida said while opening a small smile. Izuku remembered him saying that his brother was a hero. Ingenium. Izuku thought he was amazing. His quirk could be so good both to attack or defense. You have a brother, dude. Older or younger? He heard Kirishima say, almost excited. Yes, he is 15 years older than me, but we're still very close. That's cool. Kirishima's smile faded a bit. I have an older brother too. Not that older, but still, he kept silent for a while. I wished we were as united as you two seem to be. Shut up, shitty hair. No one asked, Katsuki said, staring at his nails. Bakugo, this is really not polite. Well, it isn't polite to toss your family problems in the middle of a conversation neither, so I don't care, he interrupted. No, that's fine, really, Kirishima said, smiling again. There's no problem between us, he lives in another city, so I can't see him quite often. No one seemed to know what to say now. The tension was building up by the second. Izuku was still trying to figure out what to do, even though nothing seemed to work. He had no idea what it was going to be, so there was no way he could plan in advantage. They were now waiting at the door that led to the stadium. They heard the muffled cheers on the outside that were definitely terrifying. Now, from the hero course, Class 1 and 1B. Fine, just fine, Izuku thought when he saw himself battling for space between huddled bodies, trying to get out to the racing course. If it wasn't for the shock absorption, he would be sore just from the many pokes he'd received from other people's elbows. Katsuki's speech had been petty to say the least. It hadn't even been a speech, actually. Could they consider a phrase a speech? Not likely, but he hadn't been the only one to dislike it. No one appreciated it. Well, he shouldn't think about it now. He had a race to win, or at least try to. Todoroki had the lead, which didn't come as a surprise since Izuku knew he was good at it. He had finished second at the entrance exams race, hadn't he? Not only that, but the majority of the contestants weren't from the hero course nor had quirk training, so it gave the 40 hero course students some advantage. Izuku looked around to see the other participants. Katsuki, Kirishima, and Yaoyorozu came after Todoroki. There was also a guy being carried. What? It must be quirk related, but still. So many quirks and possibilities. No, not stealing anything. Not now. These people had no advantage whatsoever, so Izuku needed to use his physical abilities. Suddenly, several giant robots appeared. What in the actual hell was that? Izuku knew the sports festival was brutal, but when he saw it from a small TV, it didn't seem that bad. The robots from the entrance exam. Someone said. The what? If those were at the public exam. Izuku was just glad he had been able to pass the recommendation 1. Izuku saw Todoroki freezing the robots without even sweating. He needed to find a way to pass it. Quickly, he didn't want it to fail at this on national television. It'd be too humiliating. The robots crashed as Izuku started running. By miracle, he was able to stop a few centimeters away from the place the last robot had landed. closing his eyes when the dust on the ground raised due to the impact. He got scared when Kirishima just appeared from inside the robot. Did it crash on top of him? That couldn't have been very pleasant. Lucky him for having a hardening quirk. Izuku needed to be careful or else. Wait, he actually didn't. He didn't get hurt. Yeah, his quirk absorption had a limit, but he doubted he could surpass it easily. The 2 punches that thing had given him were really strong, but he hadn't had any side effects. Izuku glanced at a piece of the robot that had just detached from the machine and was now laying right in front of him. It was a metal board, a bit heavy, but nothing he couldn't handle. Izuku grinned. This was going to be fun. So, why aren't you watching the third-year competition? Nedzu's voice was sweet, just as his expression, but Toshinori didn't trust it. He knew the principal too well. You see, I am a first-year teacher, so it's more than logical for me to watch their competition, Yagi coughed. So it has nothing to do with the fact that Midoriya is a first-year student. Absolutely nothing to do with it. You've always been a terrible liar, Yagi, Nedzu said, making Toshinori cough a bit of blood. Sorry, All Might was embarrassed. Nedzu had the incredible capacity to make him nervous just by smiling and being calm. Oh, no need to be sorry. The principal laughed. I get that you like the boy, but Tagata is your successor, if I am not mistaken. Seeing his fight could be helpful, Toshinori nodded while avoiding eye contact. I am not mad at you for liking the boy, but think about it for a while. I can't force you to give him the power, of course. It is your legacy. If you choose to give it to somebody else, I will respect it, Nedzu kept talking. But you asked for my opinion. And even though having one for all and all for one in the same person would make them powerful, it would also be very dangerous. Dangerous for the kid. Toshinori's heartbeat fastened. Dangerous for everybody, actually. When Izuku thought about making an explosion that would toss him at the other side of the camp, it seemed like a good idea. He hadn't thought about the getting on the ground part, starting to become a habit. Fuck. Hound Dog's voice played in his head. You shouldn't make fun of things like that. He knew it, of course he did. But it was just some sick part inside of him that sometimes he couldn't control. The boy didn't remember it before the thing, but ever since then it had started to grow, little by little. But it actually didn't bother him. Izuku was now side by side with Todoroki and Katsuki. He couldn't land now, it would mean that he would lose his position. He wanted to win this. The boy used both Katsuki's and Todoroki's back to keep himself stable and then twisted his body to the front and used the momentum to hit the piece of metal on the ground. The impact was going to activate landmines, giving him the impulse he needed to keep on going. Izuku just needed to make sure to keep his body in a position that would allow him to start running as soon as he hit the ground. The explosion not only made him advance, but it also made Todoroki and Katsuki slow down their pace. Izuku fell a few meters forward, making sure to bend his knees as Mr. Shimura had taught him. He realized, mid-fall, that it wasn't going to be enough. The boy rolled over his shoulders to avoid slowing down as much as possible. That was the best option. When he got up, Izuku could see the entrance. Even though he couldn't hear very well, his heart was beating so hard that it reached his ears, muffling any other sounds. The moment he entered the stadium, the screams were so loud it was impossible not to hear them. Seeing it from the TV was nothing like actually being there. Izuku smiled as President Mike announced he'd won the first round. That was amazing. He let a big smile flash through his face. He did it. He won the race. He beated Katsuki. Not like it was that much of a deal, right? He had already had a bit of revenge. He didn't need it any more of it. The adrenaline rush had passed while the other students entered the place, and Izuku was starting to feel less amazing. Katsuki stared at him with bloodshot eyes, while Todoroki just looked the same as usual, with a plain expression in his face. Izuku started to analyze what had happened. It had been luck. It was not his own abilities. He had found something he could use, but he had no chance of winning if that piece of metal hadn't fallen from the robot. His quirk wasn't enough. Hey, Deku, congratulations, Uraraka said, getting closer to him. Thanks, Uraraka, but it really, don't even try saying it wasn't amazing, the girl said with a fake angry expression. Izuku smiled, a bit embarrassed. Uraraka had been a good friend for him since day one. They had lunched together with Ada, and it was actually the first time Izuku actually felt what it was like to have friends. The talk with Nedzu popped up in his head. He was right, in the end. Having friends, real friends that didn't scream at him nor look down on him. It was really good. Very well, let's begin the second round. Midnight's voice was loud and clear. And the second event is... It seemed like everybody had held their breaths. Izuku nibbled at his lower lip. There are 42 students going to the second round. It was usually a group activity, so Izuku wouldn't have to trust only in his power. Good. As long as he had a team with quirks that matched, things would be fine. Cavalry battle. All for One couldn't be more grateful for having a quirk that allowed him to see. It had been a recent acquisition. Tamura had found him an unknown thug that had a quirk that allowed him to see through objects, which was actually useful since his entire face had been scarred. Echolocation wouldn't allow him to watch TV. He also knew that, if it weren't for the professor's efforts to heal his cornea and retina, he wouldn't be able to see this. The green-haired boy, rushing inside the stadium with a small frown on his face. Izuku. His hair was a bit lighter than Inko's. Probably his fault, Hisashi thought. But his eyes, just like hers, beautiful viridian orbs. He was amazed by his son's quick thinking. A prodigy, he needed to admit. The boy had potential to become one of the greatest minds in history. If only he'd inherited Inko's quirk, things would have been easier for both of them. Just when Izuku thought none of this could get any worse, it did. 10 million points. That's what he'd earned from coming in first place. It was ridiculous. They could have very well had just handed him a venomous snake and asked him to go make some friends. Obviously, no one wanted to pair with him. It would be easier to steal someone else's headband than keep yours during the 15 minutes. Izuku had just started biting his nails when Uraraka approached him. The girl had been so silent that Izuku almost screamed when she touched his shoulder. Is everything okay? She sounded almost confused. Yeah, sure, everything's good, Izuku answered, putting his hand right over his heart. You just scared me a bit. Sorry. The boy mumbled something that Uraraka couldn't quite understand, but she just ignored it. At least we can call Ida, right? His quirk can be helpful. Sure. Yeah, of course. Ida was their friend. Of course he would help them. Izuku and Uraraka rushed towards the boy. Midoriya was starting to plan the things. Yeah, with Uraraka's quirk and Ida's, they could go fast. Everything would be fine. Everything crumbled in seconds. I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I don't want to depend on you for everything, Midoriya. Izuku felt like his dreams were crushed. What in the actual hell was he going to do now? Everything just fell off. If his own friend didn't want to pair with him, what was he going to do? Yeah, he didn't needed 4 people on his team, but if it were only him and Uraraka, it was not going to work. Izuku only realized he was mumbling when a weird-looking girl appeared right beside him and said it. Izuku was mortified. I am Mei Hatsum from the support course. I don't know you, but I want to use you. Izuku wasn't sure how to answer that, but at least she was straightforward. If you're the number one, then it means the eyes will be on you the entire time. That way I can show my babies to the big companies. Babies. Uraraka seemed confused. You're also going to have some advantage since you'll be able to use some support items. This was starting to sound more appealing. I brought a lot of them. Surely there'll be something useful. The girl started showing them what she'd brought. One of the items caught Izuku's eyes. Were those jetpacks? They kind of resembled air jets once. Izuku loved him. He was such an amazing hero. The plan was starting to form. All he needed now. There, Shoto was boiling with rage. He knew that pile of flaming garbage would be there, of course, but seeing him, well, it made his hatred swell. He had decided on never using his left side a long time ago. He wouldn't give that man the satisfaction of seeing it. He glanced at the hero with a bored expression. Shoto saw how Inji frowned a bit with this. It was enough. He looked back at his team. He remembered Yaoyorozu from the entrance exam and knew she had a useful quirk. Ida's quirk was also helpful, and Kaminari's. Yes, he would win this and show how he didn't need his fire side. Start. Izuku knew the majority of the teams would go straight towards him, but he at least thought they would have a bit more time to dodge. He was at the left side of the horse. Takoyami was at the right and Hatsum at the front, leaving Uraraka being the knight. They couldn't touch the ground, Izuku knew, but there was nothing that forbade them to float. Uraraka said she couldn't use her quirk in herself a lot, which made the jetpack come in handy. She could fly with them all, making them float, and, if they suddenly needed to detach, she would still be able to fly, protecting their headband without risking them falling to the ground. It was almost perfect. Izuku could only be at the side because of the shock absorption. Lucky him, right. If he hadn't had that quirk, things would have been a lot harder. Okay, Takoyami, make Dark Shadow keep an eye on our back. Hatsum, keep an eye on the ground, make sure you see everything. Izuku was searching the ground for Katsuki. He was the biggest threat right now. His quirk, even though wasn't meant for it, allowed him to fly. He needed to make sure that, if Kacchan came flying towards them, he would be the one facing him. He was the only one that could take those explosions without hurting himself. If he'd only had that quirk when he was younger. Stop it. Focus on the battle. Then he saw him. Katsuki was, as expected, flying towards him. Deku, you should be fucking glad those Hero Commission bastards allowed you to keep that stolen quirk, or else you'd be blown to bits in a second. Uraraka detached from them, using the jetpack to get a bit higher in the sky. They kept floating due to her zero gravity, but Izuku wasn't sure for how long they would be able to keep on doing it. The jetpack fuel would end at some point, and he could only hope it would last at least until the end of this battle. He saw Katsuki changing his path, going higher, but Dark Shadow went towards him and blew him to the ground. As Katsuki fell, he felt something wrapping around his waist and pulling him back to his team. Soy sauce. Hey, fucking let me go, you extras, I was almost getting it. Hold on, Bakugo, you wouldn't be able to pass Dark Shadow like that, Kirishima said while Katsuki adjusted himself. Katsuki was going to yell at him. but he stopped when he felt something being ripped off his head. You from class are all a bunch of fools. The blonde guy had a smirk in his face. Go fuck yourself, you bastard. I'll kill you. Katsuki was getting pissed. Who the fuck did that idiot thought he was? Did he think he was better than Katsuki? The moment Midnight told us that the race was going to be the first competition, it was obvious that they weren't going to drastically decrease the number of competitors. Haven't you thought about it? Oh, that fucker was asking to be hit. I estimated the number of people that were going to the next round and then just made sure to stay amidst them. He snorted a biff before rolling his eyes and facing Katsuki. A provisory leadership. So ridiculous. That was it. Kirishima, I'm going to kill this fucker, he said, hitting the boy's head as a way to tell him to go chase them. Wait, Bakugo. Go, now. The moment Katsuki got closer to the extra, he got ready to blow that presumptuous face. He didn't care if it hurt, that shithead deserved it. But he never did it. In fact, the moment he heard the explosion coming from the other guy's hand, Katsuki froze. You have a really good quirk, I must admit. The guy smiled widely now. No fucking way. It didn't happen again. It couldn't be happening again. Katsuki choked on air, feeling like his head was getting wider and bubbly. His quirk. He was powerless now. It was just like that time. The weird looks his classmates shot at him, he could feel them, burning at the back of his neck, doubting his abilities. The sensation of drowning in thin air. Why was he feeling dizzy? He was weak. His body was getting weaker. His muscles weren't able to keep him steady. He couldn't fail this. He couldn't. But mine is better. Why the fuck was Katsuki's throat in pain? He didn't know. The last thing he saw was his eyesight getting darker and darker until he felt numb and lost his consciousness. Izuku wasn't sure if he had seen it right the first time, but a few seconds later Kacchan was being taken by his teammates to Midnight. Was he hit by a quirk? Was that even allowed? Midnight told them they couldn't make other teams be disqualified, so if that's what's happened, the other team should also be disqualified. But they weren't. Katsuki had fainted. That was something Izuku had never thought he'd see in his entire life. Oh no. Uraraka cried as she felt the jetpack starting to lower its power. They had lasted up there for 10 minutes. 10, which meant there was still 5 minutes to go. And he was sure that the groups that had been ignoring them until now would come with everything they had. Uraraka, we'll get down. We need you to stay up as much as possible. Okay, try to hold on. Izuku's voice was a bit shaky. Even though they didn't wait, it would be safer to get on the ground before Uraraka fell. If they waited until the last second, she would fall right to the ground, without her horse to protect her, with several teams eager to get that headband and going against rules that said the horseman couldn't touch it. Hatsum, use your quirk to identify weak spots at our rivals' defenses. Takoyami, make sure Dark Shadow is checking our back. What are you going to do? Takoyami's deep voice asked him. I'm the punching bag. Izuku thought he could endure a bit. He was scared of quirks like Kaminari's. His quirk was shock absorption, and he knew best than to mess with electricity. It could fry his organs inside his body. Izuku had learned in school that it was irreversible and a painful way to die, unless he found that girl again. Yeah, no way he was going to be that lucky twice. Keep your eye at Kaminari. We can't let him get too close, Izuku told Dark Shadow. Uraraka was still up in the air, but they could see how unstable she was. Oh, my baby is out of fuel. I will need to add a bigger tank, and find a way to make it lighter too. Izuku smiled a bit. It was good not to be the only one that thought out loud. Uraraka, now. They needed to last 4 more minutes. Izuku saw Todoroki's team getting closer. He needed to be careful. Ida was fast, and he wasn't using all his engine power to reach them. Uraraka landed on top of them. That was it. Every single group charged towards them. Not gonna happen, Kaminari said. Izuku saw Kaminari bursting electricity everywhere. Even though it seemed like a high voltage, it flowed everywhere and went down to the ground. Even so, a few waves hit Izuku's body. Nothing too big, but enough to make his muscles tingle. He felt numb. His entire body didn't answer the way he wanted. Shit. Recipro burst. He heard Eda's voice and his brain seemed to scream for him to move. But he didn't. Nor did any of his friends. Or so he thought. Todoroki's team came rushing next to him. But he didn't grab the headband. Uraraka had, somehow, been able to press the button in the jetpack that pushed her upwards and avoided having their headband stolen. She was now falling again. Not from a high place, but the impact would still hurt a bit. For Takoyami, that is, sorry, she said when Takoyami groaned when she landed on his arms. Don't be. Izuku grinned when he saw the small smile at Takoyami's face. That had been amazing. Truly amazing. 3 minutes now. The temperature dropped. Izuku checked the wall of ice Todoroki had created to isolate them. That was going to be difficult. Guys, I need to be facing Todoroki. Izuku didn't want to steal his quirk. Not again. But, if it was the only way to win this, he wouldn't back down. It wasn't only his team. He had other people that trusted him to be useful. He couldn't let them down. Besides, he could just give it back later. Yeah, With the amount of points they had, they would definitely go to the next round. So Izuku wasn't harming him nor his team. They waited for the rival team to be only a few meters close to turn Izuku, so he would be facing them. Izuku felt like everything was happening in slow motion. Shoto's eyes formed a thin line as he was getting closer. His left hand was going towards the headband, but he didn't plan on Midoriya's hand going to touch his arm. He couldn't let him touch it. If he did, then a small fire emerged from his left side. It had been minimal, unnoticeable for anyone that hadn't been near. But still, Izuku saw how Todoroki's face contorted with some sort of disgust. He didn't care about it. He could heal his hand later. Izuku touched Todoroki's arm with his left hand and he saw the boy's eyes widen. A fraction of a second later, Todoroki was on the ground, unconscious, and the alarm that indicated the end of the battle resonated at the arena. Katsuki woke up in a hospital bed. A fucking hospital bed. As if he needed something like that. He ignored the slight headache and how cold his fingers were, focusing entirely on one thing, his quirk. As fast as a cat, he sat on the bed, trying his best to make the sharp pain unnoticeable, and tried to blow little explosions. They were there, as if they'd never left. Katsuki tried to get up. He wanted to go back and fight that son of a bitch, but a voice stopped him. "Thank God you woke up." Only then he saw the three guys sitting on some chairs. His eyesight was blurry. It will vanish eventually, he thought. The one that had spoken was Kirishima. He had a concerned look in his face that Katsuki wanted to blow up. He didn't need their pity. Katsuki was a bit dizzy and his mouth was dry. Fuck it, he would treat that later. He needed to get back to the arena to fight. He needed to win. "Don't even think about it, young man," an old woman who was taking care of some extra told him. "I'm going to finish the test." Was she dumb? He needed to do it. "There is no test to finish, man," Kirishima said with a sad grin. "It ended a few minutes ago." What? He'd slept through the entirety of the exam. It wasn't a lot, about 5 minutes, but still, he was pissed. He needed to be. He wasn't sure why that feeling was there, but it had come back. That weird stomach twist that made his arms tremble. "Hey, dude, are you okay?" Dun's face asked. Yeah, he was fine. Fucking fine. He was tired of those morons looking down at him. He didn't need them to be gentle. He never needed it from anyone. Peaky, his voice was hoarse. Katsuki ignored the complaints about him leaving that room. He needed to find that bastard. He needed to see who won this shitshow. Tears came rushing through his eyes. Angry tears. He was no Deku to cry for stupid shit. These were just because he was angry. Katsuki noticed the hallway was empty and darker than the other ones. He had no fucking clue to where he was going. He leaned against the wall and muffled some sobs. Why the hell was he acting like that? "Man up. You're the best, right? You shouldn't cry." I'm sorry about that." An annoying voice cried, coming from the hallway next to where Katsuki was. "Deku, I am not here to talk about that." Actually, another voice. Was that half and half? Katsuki got as close as he could to them without risking to be seen. He could, perhaps, find out what happened in the battle, without asking anyone. "Have you ever heard of quirk marriages?" As half and half explained, Katsuki's eyes widened. What the actual fuck? That was unexpected, Izuku thought as he tried to make his thoughts slow down. Oh, boy, there was a lot of information and trauma that Todoroki had simply shared. Was that normal? Izuku wasn't that close to people his age, so he couldn't tell. He was shocked, a bit confused, and, more than that, scared. Was that the number 2 hero? How in hell did this manage to be a secret for 15 years? It was surreal, and Izuku felt disgusted that a person with such a positive position could be a monster. But still, it didn't make sense. It could be Izuku's own hypocrisy, the fact that he'd grown up without a quirk, or the fact that his quirk had nothing to do with his family. But he couldn't understand Todoroki's train of thought. "I am not saying that your father doesn't sucks, Todoroki, really, he does, but this is so much bullshit." Izuku saw Todoroki frown. "What?" The boy sounded almost outraged. "I mean, you using your fire side or not won't change a thing in your father's life. I won't use his fire quirk as a way to deny his. You're aware this is not his quirk, right? And not even a fire quirk and an ice quirk. It's one quirk only, and it's yours. You're being childish." Izuku knew he could be a bit more gentle, but he really didn't think he could pass the message any other way. He knew more than anyone that gentle words weren't appreciated. "The mean one stayed with us longest. Have you ever studied quirk theory?" Shoto shook his head negatively. He never had. To be fair, his father never allowed him to have time to do anything else that didn't include physically training his quirk or studying for school so he could pass in UA. But he had heard the name before, so there's a lot of unknown facts about it. But amongst the known ones, it's proven that a person's quirk also makes changes in their body, even if it isn't a mutation one. For example, a person with an ice quirk is obviously more resistant to colder temperatures. It made sense. He remembered Fayumi didn't feel so cold in winters. His mother too, if he remembered correctly. Someone with an explosive quirk would be more resistant to heat and probably have stronger eardrums to withstand the noise. A person with an intelligence quirk would have a bigger brain and their heart would be faster, so the brain has the proper amount of oxygen. Honestly, I can go for hours about it. But then we have you. Shoto wanted to go away. He wasn't sure why, but hearing someone using scientific facts to explain why he was being so childish wasn't pleasant. Your quirk has both ice and fire. If I had to assume based on what I experienced, you don't have natural temperature resistance. Shoto also knew he was right. He hoped that no one noticed how his body was cold after he created the ice wall, but Izuku had actually used the quirk. Basically, you depend on both of your sides. One cancel the other's effect, and in the end, you only have to worry about your stamina. It's a really powerful quirk, and it has lots of potential, if used correctly. Izuku saw how the boy avoided looking at his face. He had never thought he could speak with such authority. Maybe it had been the year consulting with Hound Dog. Maybe it had been the love and support of Tsukauchi and Mr. Shimura. He wouldn't know. But it was like there was something in his chest, something that told him he could talk about quirks. Maybe it was just because he had it as a hobby. He would never know. And he, honestly, didn't care. I'm not an expert, honestly. I've always liked to study quirks, and I like the theories. You have the right to be upset or even mad at me. But, really, the only person that gets hurt from this is you. Izuku swallowed hard, feeling a bit anxious all of a sudden. And I think you should ponder if that's the best way to make your father angry. Izuku saw Todoroki nod and walk away, not even bothering to say something back. He really should let him go. It wouldn't be mature of him. But his mouth betrayed him. And, Todoroki, I'll go all out next round. I hope you do the same. If you don't, it will be awfully easy to beat your ass. Izuku felt relief rushing through his body as he saw Todoroki grin slightly. If there's anyone I'd like to beat, you can be sure that's you, Midoriya. The phone rang thrice before the person on the other side picked it up. Hello, can you talk right now? Kurogiri asked without glancing away from the television. Yeah, just a sec. Shigaraki was watching everything awfully close. If he weren't so stubborn, Kurogiri would ask him to get a bit back so it didn't harm his eyes. Not that Tamura would care about it that much. I'm here. What do you want now? The impatient tone in the kid's voice was noticeable. I wasn't expecting that performance in the cavalry battle. Impressive. Bakugo had fainted. He must be pissed if all the intel they had on him was correct. I had literally nothing to do with that. It was that other guy's fault. Nonetheless, it is a great opportunity. Make sure that the anger doesn't fade. Okay. Sensei says it would be beneficial for us. For you mean. I am not a part of this hellhole. Kurogiri could laugh. Young teenagers had such a temper. It was annoying, but he could be amused from time to time. I think you forget what's at stake. Honestly, the silence was enough for him to notice the boy understood. Fine, I'll do it. Anything else? No, I think that's everything. Kurogiri was still waiting for Sensei's answer about anyone else they needed to keep an eye. When I know more, I'll call you. Have a great day, Kirishima. Fuck you, was the last thing he heard before the line went mute. Izuku was still thinking about all the things he said once he got back to the stadium. Even though there were plenty of people screaming, Izuku barely heard as he played every expression Todoroki had done, which weren't a lot, in his mind, trying to see if he hated him. It was a possibility, but Izuku really wasn't trying to make enemies so soon. What if Todoroki told the others he was rude? Izuku hoped he didn't. He wasn't looking forward to a middle school replay. Why did I even open my mouth? Okay, contesters, let's begin the third round, Midnight said with a velvet-like voice. We all know it's the individual rounds, but who will face who? The drum in the background to build tension was overly dramatic. Izuku turned his eyes, searching for his name. Who was Shinso? He had no idea. But still, to get to the third round, he needed to be good, right? I'm sorry, Midnight, but I'd like to give my spot up, Ajiro said. Izuku turned to look at him with a baffled look. But he wasn't the only one shocked with the boy's decision. The entirety of the participants started to ask him several questions. Why? This is a golden opportunity. Are you sure? Do you need a doctor? I can barely remember the cavalry battle. Only the end. He looked at the purple-haired guy that avoided to stare at anyone. Probably his quirk. Izuku remembered him. He was the one being carried by those people during the race. If his quirk manipulated the mind, yeah, it was dangerous. I know it is a golden opportunity, and also know it's stupid to throw it away, but everybody put so much effort in it. Everybody here did. I feel like an imposter. I don't deserve to be here. Don't worry about it, Ajiro. You can show your value in the fights. Hagakure cheered him up. Izuku was still baffled. He couldn't give up, could he? No, it's not like that. It's a pride matter. I don't want to be here if I didn't fight for it. I would also like to withdraw. A boy from Class B, Shota, if Izuku remembered correctly, spoke. Everybody looked at Midnight. The silence seemed impossible to reach since the place was filled with people. You are both naive and immature. The two boys looked down. Just the way I like it. Izuku decided not to think too much about Midnight's thought process. It wasn't worth his time. I accepted. It means 2 people from another team will get in your place. A few moments later, and they already had the names. Anjiro and Shota had been replaced by Tetsu and Shizaki. Now, the first contestants go to the waiting room. You'll have some time to prepare for the fight. Izuku started walking away. So, you're Izuku Midoriya, right? The purple-haired guy asked. Midoriya, can I speak with you for a moment? Anjiro called him, putting his hairy tail on top of Izuku's mouth. It's important. Toshinori watched as the third years got ready. Young Tagata had a large smile on his face. Toshinori saw how he'd mastered his quirk. Amazing. Netsu was right when he told Toshinori about the boy's abilities. He had mastered a very complicated quirk, so it shouldn't be very hard for him to master a simple stockpiling one, right? His smile faded a bit with the thought. Perhaps he should speak to Sir. He definitely seemed to like the boy. That way, maybe, a bit of his enthusiasm would make Toshinori a little more hopeful. Izuku felt the weight of thousands of eyes at the back of his neck. He had no idea how All Might dealt with being watched 24/7. It seemed terrifying, especially to someone that wasn't used to draw attention. Like him, the first round starts now. From the hero course, Izuku Midoriya vs. Hitoshi Shinso, from the General Education Department. Izuku breathed heavily. Anjiro had helped him. He wasn't going to speak. He would win this. He needed to fight Todoroki after all. Izuku was really trying to keep himself calm. He was, but he wanted to talk so bad. It was like that guy knew exactly what to say to make him restless. Growing up with such a powerful quirk must have been a charm. Yeah, truly amazing. Because that was exactly what happened. Izuku wanted to scream back, say how fucking wrong he was. Oh, did I get it wrong? Did people hate you for how villainous it was? Izuku thought about answering back. Something in the way he spoke. It wasn't just to piss him off. The way he contorted the side of his mouth, how his Adam's apple moved up and down. Did that happen to him? It would be possible. In Aldera, Izuku wouldn't hang out with other people, but he would often see people mocking this girl that had a quirk that allowed her to steal energy from other living things. If she doesn't like you, she can kill you. They also bullied a guy that had a mosquito mutation quirk, saying that people shouldn't get near them or else he would suck their blood. And it didn't stop when he explained he didn't do it. It didn't stop when she said she couldn't kill somebody because she had limitations. The bias was there, not only to quirkless people, but to all of those who had quirks that weren't pretty, flashy, or inherently good. Anything that didn't match the hero standard was immediately targeted as unworthy, evil, or bad. It was sad, but, in the end, that was how society worked. And it sucked. Izuku closed his eyes. He needed to focus on the fight or else he would end up opening his mouth. He felt bad about ending this, but he wanted to win. Even though he sympathized with Shinso, he couldn't lose because of that. Even though Izuku hadn't had much training, he was probably stronger than the other guy. He had more muscle, and probably knew more moves. That could also be the reason why the purple-haired guy was keeping his distance. It would be easy, which only made things worse. Izuku rushed towards the guy. He saw how Shinso gave some steps back, trying to keep the distance. He hadn't much space to run through. Izuku grabbed him by the uniform's arm and collar. He definitely needed to work on his moves. They weren't as clean as Mr. Shimura's, but it was enough to throw Shinso on the ground and then immobilize him. It had been quick, lame, even, but Izuku didn't care about it. He just hoped Shinso wouldn't hate him. Midoriya wins, Present Mike said before complimenting with a bit boring as the opening fight, but whatever. The boy offered a hand to Shinso, but he rejected it. Thank you, but I don't feel like risking it. Sorry. The disgust in his voice was clear while he got up on his own. It took Izuku a few seconds to understand what the hell he was talking about, and when he did, he felt dumb. He didn't even ask if the guy was okay after the fight. He must have looked so rude. He had every right to be mad about that. Izuku's quirk had the same villainous technicalities as Shinso's in the end, and he didn't even give him a chance to use his. One way or the other, they were the same. The difference was that Izuku hadn't had to endure the bullying about being a villain. Yeah, being called useless was horrible, but he got help. He knew he wasn't useless. He got into UA. Damn it. But Shinso, he didn't have that peace of mind. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you. Shinso nodded his head as he started to get out of the arena. Hey, the guy stared at him. I don't think you have a villainous quirk. Shinso laughed shortly, which sounded more like a cough, while Izuku started walking towards him. Thanks, but I think you might be the only one. Well, then the other ones are stupid. Shinso seemed confused as they started to walk together, getting inside the building. Your quirk doesn't define you, Izuku said. In the end, a villainous quirk is the one that's used to do evil things. If you use yours for good, then it isn't bad, nor villainous. It was true. Izuku had never given it much of a thought, but there was a reason he trembled a bit whenever he heard explosions. Even so, that had been a quirk that everyone believed was perfect for a hero. Hitoshi smiled. A small smile. But, if he was going to be honest, probably the most sincere one he had shown in a long time. Katsuki didn't watch the first fight. He actually wasn't planning on watching any of that shit, but Kirishima basically dragged him. Even when Katsuki blew his side, he just hardened the skin and kept pulling the blonde. I don't want to fucking watch those extras fight. Let me go. Ijiro faked a smile. Come on, man, it's going to be fun. Ijiro didn't want to do it. He really didn't. But Kurogiri was right. He was fucking right. There was too much to risk. He needed to make Bakugo angry. For what? He honestly didn't know. He didn't ask. It would be too much to handle. Too much to be able to keep his bright face. It was almost unbearable normally, so he really didn't need to know what the hell those bastards were going to do. Somehow, it made him feel less guilty, and he felt a hypocrite for it. The second fight had been Kaminari versus Kaibara. The Class B student had a quirk that allowed him to make any part of his body rotate like a drill. Izuku thought Kaminari had a good chance of winning, but in the end, he didn't. Kaibara used the electricity rushing through his muscles to make the rotations faster. He ended up giving Kaminari a punch in the guts. Izuku just saw while a short-circuited Kaminari groaned from the probably more painful than usual blow. That couldn't possibly be good to his brain, unless his body already predicted it and it was the way he had found to not actually fry the boy's brain once he overused it. The possibilities were so interesting. Anyways, it didn't matter. It only meant that Izuku had to worry about Kaibara's quirk. A close combat won. Once again, Izuku was glad he had shock absorption. Perhaps he should ask for somebody else's quirk. Maybe some of his classmates would help. You're mumbling, Deku, Uraraka warned him. The boy laughed and started writing in his notebook about Kaibara's quirk. They were going against each other next round, so he wanted to have as many plans as possible. Izuku wasn't expecting the third round to be that quick. Kiwaro versus Monoma. The two of them from Class B. Kiwaro didn't even try. When Monoma made his hands bigger and drew the boy out of the boundaries, he just stared with a tired expression. What was his quirk? His name definitely had something to do with his skin tone, pitch black. Izuku wished he'd paid more attention to the other teams during the cavalry battle. He could have sworn Monoma had another one, something explosive, or he had just seen it wrongly. He was too high up. Anyway, he could have mixed the things. Next fight was Aoyama versus Tetsu. Izuku tried to muffle a laugh. Those names really matched, huh? Not like he could say anything. His name was Midoriya, and he had green hair. It was weird to inherit his mother's name, but he had. And his father too. Unusual, definitely. Unfortunately, Aoyama had no chance against Tetsu. His naval laser just ricocheted off the metal skin. After that, it was a matter of seconds before Aoyama was down on the ground, defeated by his quirk's side effect. Class B was really amazing, huh? Obviously the crowd was getting impatient. They wanted real fights, not that. But then, the Yaoyorozu versus Tokoyami was just as bad. No one was expecting much about the Tsuburaba versus Shigaraki fight, but it had been quite something. It wasn't the best fight in the world, but the way Shigaraki's vines tried to reach Tsuburaba just to hit the hardened air he had made, it was cool. In the end, the girl decided to be bold. She used some vines to deviate the attention and a few others went underground. How strong were they to be able to break through cement? Tsuburaba was immobilized by Shigaraki's vines, which made the girl win. Because of that, everybody was excited for the next round. Uraraka versus Hatsume. It was nothing like they imagined it would be. That support girl was crazy. There were 10 minutes of Hatsume showing off her babies while Uraraka tried to touch her so she could win. In the end, Hatsume just stepped out of the ring as if nothing had happened. Okay, this is boring. Kirishima's voice echoed behind Izuku. I fucking told you it wouldn't be interesting. Those extras are a bunch of losers. Katsuki had his arms crossed in a pout while Kirishima tried to cheer him up. Izuku didn't say anything. Katsuki would probably scream at him if he did. Anyways, he just waited. The next fight was something that he wanted to see. The last fight in the first round. Todoroki walked calmly into the arena. His face was bland, but the intensity in his eyes, it made Izuku feel goosebumps. Shoto, on the other hand, felt like his own body was about to pour with hate. That asshole had tried to talk to him, as if Shoto needed it. He knew it wasn't going to be a simple good luck. Endeavor wasn't the kind of person that wished these things to others, but he wasn't expecting his father to basically insult him either. You should use your fireside and win this. It's already a shame you got beaten up by that green boy twice. Use the perfect quirk I gave you. No, he wouldn't. Edo was getting ready, flexing his legs. Shoto knew he wouldn't use them. As the start echoed, Shoto used all his rage to make a nice wall. It was big. Too big, if he was being honest. But he needed to be sure. Ada's quirk generated heat, so it wouldn't hurt to be extra careful. Besides, the look at his father's face would be unpayable. The people watching were impressed. Shoto could see by the way they whispered to each other. Ada, can you move? Midnight asked. Ada denied and Shoto started melting the ice. I'm sorry. He felt a bit bad about doing it. Ada had a brother that he looked up to right. Shoto understood the want to make him proud. But, unfortunately for Ada, Shoto wanted to win more than help a classmate. You won by your abilities. There's no need to be sorry. Ada's voice was professional, almost. Wow, that was quite something after those other fights. Present Mike's voice was high. Todoroki wins. Shoto looked to where his classmates were. Midoriya glanced at him with a small smirk. It will be awfully easy to beat your ass. They would see about that, sooner or later. Shoto looked at the score. For him to fight Midoriya, it would be in the finals. This time, he was the one that smirked.